Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere very old. Older than toothpaste ads, dental clinics, or even the idea of morning breath. We're stepping barefoot into the warm sands of the Nile Delta, where the air smells faintly of silt and lotus, and a fisherman hums while pushing his papyrus boat through the foggy dawn. You crouch beside the riverbank, watching the sunlight spill over limestone temples and mud brick houses. It's a scene frozen in time, and yet there's something familiar about it. Someone, somewhere, is reaching for a bowl of powder and a rough brush, muttering that their mouth feels like a tomb. You probably wouldn't survive this place, at least not comfortably. The mosquitoes alone are legendary, the heat is relentless, and the bread, well, it's basically edible sandpaper. But the people here? They're thriving, civilized, and strangely obsessed with clean teeth. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love imagining this little global campfire of sleepy history lovers, scattered from Cairo to Kansas. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in ancient Egypt, sometime around 3000 BCE, when the Nile was the heartbeat of everything. The river floods, the crops grow, and life follows rhythms older than kings. You wander through a small village as it wakes. A farmer leads his donkeys out, a potter shapes clay, and a child rinses their face with river water, rubbing something white and gritty over their gums. The smell is sharp, salt, ash, maybe a hint of iris flower. It's their version of toothpaste, though no one calls it that yet. The Egyptian sun rises fast, burning off the morning mist. You squint toward the fields, where women in linen wraps chew twigs with frayed ends, their makeshift brushes. The chewing releases sap, a primitive form of mouthwash. Archaeologists have found remnants of these sticks, their tips worn smooth by use. The tradition still exists in parts of Africa and the Middle East, proof that good ideas have a long shelf life. You duck into a small house. The floor is packed earth, the walls painted with faded ochre lines. A clay pot sits by the doorway, filled with crushed rock salt and ash. The homeowner dips a wet finger into the mixture, rubs it across their teeth, and spits into the sand outside. No minty foam, no fluoride sparkle, just the raw satisfaction of starting the day clean, or at least cleaner. It's easy to laugh now, but for them, this was part of something sacred. Cleanliness wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. In the Egyptian worldview, every act, from washing to praying, tied into the balance of Ma'at, the goddess of order and harmony. A clean mouth meant respect for the body the gods had given you. Historians still argue whether this was more about religion or hygiene, but either way, they took it seriously. You wander past a temple courtyard where priests chant softly under painted pillars. They wear shaven heads and carry copper bowls of scented water. Before each ritual, they rinse their mouths, not because anyone's watching, but because they believe words spoken to the gods must come from a purified mouth. Think of it as divine mouthwash. It's oddly poetic. Your prayers only work if your breath doesn't knock anyone out. The Nile breeze carries a whiff of lotus and mud. You follow a narrow path toward a cluster of palm trees. Children play nearby, splashing each other with water and laughing, their teeth surprisingly white against the bronze of their skin. Egyptian skeletons, unearthed by archaeologists, show that, despite their primitive toothpaste, many had decent dental health for their time, though plenty suffered from abrasion. The culprit wasn't sugar, it was sand. Every loaf of bread here is ground with stone tools which leave tiny bits of grit in the flour. Over a lifetime, that grit wears enamel down to the root. You can almost feel the ache in your jaw just thinking about it. Imagine smiling at someone with sandpaper teeth. It hurts, but it's still part of the charm of being human. The day warms quickly. A scribe sits under a sycamore tree, scribbling on papyrus, his reed pen scratching softly. He pauses, dips his brush into a small jar, takes a pinch of powder and dabs it onto his gums before continuing. This might be your first glimpse of the world's earliest toothpaste commercial, though his only audience is a passing goat. One quirk of Egyptian culture you'll notice: everything is documented. Births, deaths, dreams, dental recipes. If it mattered, someone wrote it down. The result is a civilization that still whispers across millennia, even about the small stuff. One ostracan, a broken pottery shard, records an ingredient list for a tooth cleaning powder: rock salt, dried iris flower, mint, and a bit of pepper. The combination must have burned, but perhaps that was the point. Pain meant power. You pass through a marketplace buzzing with noise. Traders sell barley, honey, perfume, and little packets of crushed herbs wrapped in linen. Some buyers sniff them, pleased, claiming they're for freshness. You realize you're standing in the ancient world's first oral care aisle. No jingles, no smiling dentists, just trial, error, and a lot of strong smells. Nearby, a musician strums a lute, singing about a girl whose smile was bright as alabaster. Love poetry from this era often mentioned teeth. They weren't just for eating, they were status symbols. The poor had worn down yellowed teeth. The wealthy flaunted gleaming ones polished with pumice. And you thought influencer culture started on Instagram. A sandstorm picks up in the distance, blurring the edges of the desert. The people around you carry on calmly. Sand in your mouth is just part of the deal. You cover your face and think. Maybe that's why toothpaste was invented here first. Not vanity, but survival. As dusk falls, you look up at the sky turning copper red. The Nile glimmers like a mirror. Somewhere in the distance, someone laughs after tasting their gritty herbal paste and deciding maybe tomorrow they'll use less pepper. It's a small human moment. Proof that even thousands of years ago, people were just trying to start the day feeling a little fresher. You're still standing by the Nile and the air has cooled to something like silk. The hum of insects fades into the low rustle of reeds. You glance back toward the village, now alive with the quiet rhythm of daily life. Grinding, weaving, fetching water, and, somewhere in the background, the faint scrape of a twig against teeth. It's a small sound, but it tells you everything about why teeth mattered here. To the ancient Egyptians, a good smile wasn't just about looking pleasant. It was proof that you were in harmony with yourself, that you respected your place in the grand cosmic order. Clean teeth meant discipline, and discipline was a kind of prayer. A person who cared for their body was, in their eyes, a person who respected the gods. It's humbling, really, that this little act of brushing, something you probably do half asleep every morning, once held the weight of spiritual significance. You walk toward a mural half buried in sand, painted on the wall of an old tomb. The figures are stiff and graceful, their profiles outlined in ochre and black. One man is pouring water over his hands, another holds a stick to his mouth. At first glance, you think he's just playing a flute, but look closer. That stick has a frayed end. It's a chewing twig, miswak, as later generations would call it. The Egyptians might not have known fluoride, but they knew something worked. Archaeologists found similar images across tombs and reliefs, subtle, almost hidden gestures showing daily care. To them, hygiene wasn't private. It was part of life's ideal form. In hieroglyphic prayers, there's a phrase that translates roughly to, "I am pure of mouth and heart." It's written beside depictions of offerings, proof that the act of cleaning your mouth wasn't just cosmetic. It prepared your soul. You can imagine a priest in white linen robes, dipping a reed brush into a paste made from natron, a natural salt used in mummification and cleaning. He rubs it over his teeth, grimaces slightly, then rinses with cool water. Natron was everywhere in Egyptian life, for washing clothes, preserving the dead, even as a primitive soap. Of course, it was terribly abrasive. Historians still argue whether its frequent use helped or ruined their smiles, but it certainly left them minty fresh, or at least less mummy breath. Nearby, a farmer sharpens his sickle, humming. He pauses, picks up a mixture of crushed rock and dried herbs, and uses his finger as a toothbrush. His tools and his toothpaste share one thing: grit. In Egypt, grit was unavoidable. It floated in the air, mixed into flour, coated every object. You could say sand was their national spice, and yet, despite living in a dusty oven, they found ways to stay remarkably clean. Baths weren't luxuries. They were daily rituals. The Nile was their faucet, their mirror, and sometimes their god. The same hands that planted barley also reached for salt to polish teeth. Even the poorest workers on pyramid sites were issued rations of cleansing agents. Not because their bosses were kind, but because a clean worker was a healthy one. And a healthy one built faster. There's something soothing about that, this quiet, cyclical logic. You eat bread filled with sand, which ruins your teeth, so you make paste from more sand to clean them. It's both tragic and oddly poetic, like using the problem to fight itself. One joke later scribes might have told, if papyrus could smile, is that Egypt didn't invent toothpaste so much as invent reasons to need it. As you wander through a bazaar, you notice traders arguing over powders and herbs. One is offering powder for the teeth of pharaohs, claiming it restores whiteness, like the moon over the Nile. Another scoffs, saying his blend cools the mouth like morning dew. Advertising existed even then, only without jingles. Just poetic exaggeration. You pause by a merchant who lets you sniff a small linen pouch. The smell hits hard, burnt eggshells, pepper, and maybe a whiff of frankincense. It's both unpleasant and strangely clean, like a mouthwash made by an alchemist. He tells you it soothes bad humors. He might not understand bacteria, but he's halfway to modern dental science. Factually, we know Egyptians linked bad breath to imbalances in the body, particularly the stomach and lungs. Medical papyri suggest remedies combining honey, cinnamon, and beer, meant to refresh the breath of one who speaks to the king. That's a polite way of saying, don't gas your boss. The funny thing? Honey and cinnamon both have antibacterial properties. Their superstition accidentally worked. You pass an old man leaning on a cane, telling a young boy that bad breath angers the gods. The boy giggles, covering his mouth. The gods smell everything, the old man warns, his voice half serious. And maybe he believes it. For the Egyptians, smell had meaning. Fragrance was purity. When they spoke of something good, they said it was sweet-smelling. When they cursed an enemy, they said his odor offended the heavens. So naturally, tooth care wasn't about smiles. It was about not stinking in front of eternity. You look around and you realize that while most civilizations built pyramids to honor gods, Egypt built routines. Every rinse, every brushing motion was part of maintaining order. You can almost hear the soft, rhythmic scraping of thousands of people across centuries, polishing their teeth by sunrise. The idea of hygiene as holiness didn't just shape their mornings, it defined their morality. By nightfall, the desert cools again. The moon spills silver over the water, and you spot fishermen cleaning their nets and rinsing their mouths before resting. The same ritual, the same motion, the same quiet pride in being pure of mouth. Somewhere, a scribe scribbles by lamplight, a clean mouth brings clean words. The phrase, fated but enduring, will one day be found by archaeologists, who'll chuckle and maybe brush their own teeth before bed. And as you listen to the Nile's hush, you can't help but feel connected. You, standing there with your electric toothbrush at home, and this farmer with his bowl of natron, both trying to do the same simple thing. Greet the day without embarrassment. The sand shifts under your feet, whispering softly. You exhale, the night air cool and dry, and realize the story of toothpaste isn't really about teeth. It's about pride, ritual, and the human need to feel clean, even when the world around you is made of dust. The day stretches wider now, the Nile glinting like molten bronze beneath the sky's glare. You trudge along the riverbank toward a cluster of houses, drawn by the clatter of stone mortars and the low murmur of morning routines. The scent that drifts through the air is peculiar, ashy, salty, faintly sweet. Someone, somewhere, is making toothpaste. You peer into one of the houses. Inside, the floor is cool clay, the light filtered through woven reeds. A woman kneels before a small bowl, her arms steady as she grinds a mixture of dried salt, burnt ash, and crushed limestone. Her pestle thuds rhythmically. The sound is hypnotic, like a heartbeat wrapped in dust. She glances up at you, smiles, revealing teeth that are worn but strong, and then goes back to her work. This, historians believe, was the earliest morning routine, a humble ritual performed long before oral hygiene was even a phrase. There's no gleaming sink, no ceramic tiles, no minty foam swirling down the drain. Just a handful of powders, a twig, a bit of water, and time. It's strangely peaceful. You can almost feel the grit between your fingers as she sifts the powder, testing its texture with the care of a modern barista checking coffee grounds. The Egyptians weren't guessing entirely. They noticed patterns. People who scrubbed their teeth with natron and pumice lived with fewer mouth sores. Those who ignored it developed abscesses, infections, or worse. Of course, no one fully understood why. They simply knew it worked. That quiet, empirical wisdom, the kind that grows from observation rather than explanation, was the root of early science. Outside, a potter stretches his back and rinses his mouth with water from a jar. He chews the end of a twig, fraying it until it softens, then dips it in ash. His face tightens at the taste, sharp, alkaline, bitter. He scrubs anyway, humming under his breath. Historians still argue whether this act was habitual or ceremonial, but it hardly matters now. To him, it's just what mornings are for. The sun climbs higher, bleaching the walls pale yellow. From a nearby window, a child giggles as she mimics her mother, dipping her tiny finger into a bowl and rubbing it along her gums. The paste burns and she grimaces, but she keeps going. "The gods like clean mouths," her mother murmurs. That phrase passes from one generation to another, long before any dental pamphlet ever existed. In the corner, an old clay jar holds what looks like chalk dust. The woman mixes a little water into it, creating a paste the consistency of wet sand. She lifts her frayed twig and applies it to her teeth in slow, deliberate circles. The process is meditative, almost prayer-like. Watching her, you begin to understand. The act itself mattered as much as the result. There's a reason ancient Egyptians built an entire belief system around order and cleanliness. They lived in a world constantly on the edge of chaos, floods, famine, sandstorms, plagues. To wash, to brush, to purify was to push back against that chaos. Each scrub across the teeth was a small act of defiance against decay. A stray breeze brings the faint smell of iris flower, delicate and powdery. Someone nearby must be grinding petals into their toothpaste mix. The iris was prized not only for its scent, but also for its symbolic purity. It was associated with renewal and rebirth. If you ever visit a museum and see a small alabaster jar labeled "for the mouth," it might once have held a mixture like this: salt for cleansing, pepper for stimulation, iris for the breath, and burnt hooves or eggshells for abrasion. Not exactly a pleasant cocktail, but it worked. Imagine that taste for a moment. Salty, smoky, and floral with a kick of pepper. You wince involuntarily. Yet this concoction represents one of humanity's earliest scientific formulas, measured, repeated, refined. And in an odd way, it was community-driven. Villagers shared recipes, priests adjusted proportions, and the wealthy paid scribes to document improved versions. In today's world, that's research and development. By midday, the village hums with commerce. Traders call out from wooden stalls, selling herbs and oils. One man claims his powder banishes the spirits of decay, while another swears his keeps your lover close by sweetening your breath. Marketing, it seems, is older than history itself. The richer families had more elaborate routines. Servants would prepare bowls of natron mixed with rose petals and honey. The honey helped mask the harsh flavor and, as modern science later confirmed, its enzymes killed bacteria. It's strangely comforting to realize that even 5,000 years ago, someone was bribing a servant to make brushing their teeth less awful. In one corner of the marketplace, a small shrine stands shaded by palm leaves. A clay statue of a god with a lion's head watches over it, perhaps Sekhmet, goddess of healing. Offerings lie at her feet: bread, flowers, and a little bowl of white powder. It's not impossible that someone offered toothpaste to a deity. After all, if health was divine, why not start with the mouth? You lean on a pillar and watch life flow around you. The world smells of sweat, myrrh, and river water. The air tastes of dust. And yet, under this grit, there's elegance. You notice how people smile at one another, broad and unashamed, despite their abrasive diet and rough paste. Maybe they didn't expect perfection. Maybe it was enough to feel clean, to feel human, in a land ruled by sand and stone. Somewhere nearby, a scribe dips his pen and records a recipe on papyrus. Powder for the teeth, 1 drachma of rock salt, 1 drachma of dried iris, 1 drachma of pepper, and a pinch of mint. His handwriting is careful, the ink dark. Centuries later, archaeologists will find this record, dust it off, and marvel that it describes something so ordinary, so profoundly relatable. You walk away, sand crunching underfoot. The village fades into the golden haze of afternoon. You realize that you've just witnessed the start of a ritual that will one day become second nature to billions. No matter how many centuries pass, the intention remains the same: to greet the world with a clean mouth and a little dignity. The wind carries a trace of salt and ash again, and you smile faintly. Maybe the smell isn't so bad after all. The afternoon heat presses down on the land like a heavy blanket. Even the river seems to move slower, thick with light and history. You find yourself inside a modest workshop, where the air smells of minerals and smoke. This is where the magic, or rather the grinding, happens. The first toothpaste makers were not perfumers or doctors, but practical artisans, grinders, mixers, and a few curious healers who noticed that the mouth, like bronze, could shine when properly polished. On the floor, 4 men sit in a circle, each with a small grinding stone. They take turns crushing materials that at first glance seem more suited for pottery than teeth. Burnt ox hooves, crushed pumice, powdered limestone, and a little salt. The tools are primitive, stones against stones, but the sound they make is rhythmic, like ancient percussion. You can almost fall asleep to it, if not for the occasional puff of ash stinging your nose. One man laughs as the powder rises in a cloud, coating his hair gray. He looks like a ghost of the desert, but he's proud of his work. These men aren't just making cleaning paste, they're preserving a tradition. Their fathers and grandfathers did the same, tweaking the recipe as materials changed. The result was always the same, a fine powder that scoured the mouth clean. Rough, yes. Effective, definitely. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians understood the chemical side of what they were doing. Some claim they simply experimented until something felt right. Others think they observed small, consistent results. Less pain, fewer sores, sweeter breath, and reasoned backward from there. It's the classic human method. Try, fail, repeat, boast. You squat beside one of the men and watch closely. He sprinkles in a pinch of ash from burnt ox hooves. The smell is strong, earthy, metallic. Keeps the mouth strong like the beast, he mutters. It's not superstition. It's symbolism. The Egyptians loved metaphors. Everything they used had meaning. Oxen represented power, endurance, and fertility. So, of course, burning their bones to powder must, in theory, lend strength to human teeth. Across the room, another worker adds crushed pumice stone, imported from faraway volcanic lands. The granules shimmer faintly like powdered glass. He grinds until they mix with salt and ash, forming a grayish dust that catches the light. Smooth as river silt, he says proudly. And indeed, the texture is almost silky. You can imagine the gritty drag of it between your teeth, half torture, half refreshment. They bottle the final product into small clay jars sealed with wax. A merchant will buy the lot by sunset, carry it to the city, and sell it to households or temples. Each jar, unmarked and simple, represents an early form of mass production. Not glamorous, but steady business. Egyptians were nothing if not organized. They had tax receipts for bread, records for workers, and yes, sometimes, accounts for hygiene supplies. You follow one merchant down a dusty street as he balances baskets of jars on a donkey. "Powder for the mouth," he calls, his voice echoing against mud brick walls. "Sweetens the breath, strengthens the tooth." Housewives lean from their doorways, curious. A few trade barley or oil in exchange. The merchant smiles, revealing his own teeth, slightly discolored but intact. A good endorsement, considering the times. A young scribe passing by stops to ask about the ingredients. The merchant shrugs. "Ask the priests," he says. "They whisper recipes to the gods." That, you learn, is partly true. Many formulas were recorded and guarded by temple scribes. Medicine and religion were intertwined here. There was no clean line between what healed and what sanctified. You pass through the open gate of a temple. The walls are cool and echoing, covered in painted figures, priests offering jars, gods receiving them. You can almost hear the rustle of linen and the low hum of prayers. Inside a small side chamber, 2 priests grind herbs beneath a shaft of sunlight. They're making something fragrant, likely a ritual mixture. But nearby, a scribe copies words from an older papyrus onto a new one. You lean closer. The ink is faded but readable. Powder for teeth, to make firm the gums and banish foulness. That might be the oldest dental recipe ever written. Burnt salt, pepper, dried iris, mint. Each ingredient has a purpose. Pepper stimulates circulation. Salt draws out infection. Iris cleanses. Mint perfumes. It's crude pharmacology wrapped in poetry. You imagine the priest lecturing a younger acolyte. Every mouth is a temple. Every word is an offering. Keep the temple clean. The boy nods, dutifully grinding herbs while sneaking glances at his reflection in a polished copper plate. Even holiness, it seems, cares about appearances. As you step back outside, the brightness stings your eyes. The air smells of heat and river mud. You can hear laughter from the next courtyard, women teasing each other about whose teeth gleam more in the sun. It's both vanity and pride. Nearby, a craftsman examines a broken pot that once held toothpaste. Its fragments are inscribed with a faint symbol, an eye surrounded by rays. The Eye of Ra, a protective sign invoking light and health. Maybe people believed the symbol blessed their daily routine, keeping disease at bay. Or maybe it was just good branding. Either way, it worked. Later, as the day cools, you rest by the water, watching ripples stretch toward the horizon. A fisherman sits beside you, flossing his teeth with a thin palm fiber. Sand everywhere, he complains softly, even between my teeth. He spits into the river, shakes his head, and smiles. But clean teeth make good dreams. The line hangs in the air, soft and sincere. You smile back. Maybe that's what all this grinding, chewing, and scrubbing was about. Not vanity, not health, but the comfort of feeling ready to face the day. Even in a world of droughts and dust, they made time to care for something small. The wind shifts, carrying the dry scent of a pumice and salt. You close your eyes and imagine their world fading into yours. Stone mortars become electric grinders. Oxbone becomes baking soda, and the rhythm of scraping stones turns into the quiet hum of a toothbrush motor. The sound hasn't changed much, only the materials. And so, here you are, 5,000 years later, still standing in the same ritual, still spitting into the sink, still searching for that feeling of cleanliness, of calm. The Egyptians started it. You're just continuing the grind. The sun begins its slow slide westward, and the sky over the Nile melts into a hazy amber. You follow the smell of crushed herbs and smoke into a narrow street where a group of apothecaries sit cross-legged before trays of ingredients. Each tray gleams with a small mountain of color. White salt, black pepper, reddish resin, greenish herbs, violet petals dried to paper-thin curls. The air is heavy with scents that mingle in strange ways, sharp, sweet, smoky, floral, even faintly metallic. This is where toothpaste begins to flirt with art. One apothecary, an elderly man with henna-stained hands, motions for you to come closer. He's grinding something that looks like pale gray ash with dark peppercorns. For the mouth of the merchant's wife, he says, half proud, half mocking. She wants to smell like a garden, not a kitchen. He chuckles, revealing teeth that look like limestone chips. I tell her beauty comes with pain. Pepper burns. She says, then I will burn like a queen, and that, apparently, is how the world's first minty burn came to be. The recipe he's working on, pepper, rock salt, dried iris flower, and mint, is one of the earliest known written dental formulas in human history. Archaeologists found it scribbled on papyrus in the city of Thebes, dating to around the 4th century BCE. It's shockingly sophisticated. The salt cleans, the pepper stimulates blood flow in the gums, the iris kills bacteria, and the mint refreshes breath. It's an effective recipe, though probably brutal to use. Modern dentists once recreated it and found that yes, it works, but it stings like regret. You watch the apothecary scoop the powder into a small jar, seal it with beeswax, and tie a reed label around its neck. The script reads, for health of the teeth, strength of the gums, and sweetness of breath. If you replace that with a shiny logo and an ADA-approved sticker, it wouldn't look out of place on a drugstore shelf. Across from him, a younger herbalist is experimenting with substitutions. He adds powdered cinnamon bark, muttering, for noble customers only. Cinnamon was imported, expensive, and fragrant, a symbol of refinement. He mixes it with ground salt and something that looks suspiciously like dried onion skin. The combination smells divine and horrifying all at once. You can't help but smirk. Some experiments should stay buried with their makers. The Egyptians had no shortage of creativity when it came to self-care. Their perfumes, oils, and cosmetics were legendary. But toothpaste, that was special. It lived at the border of necessity and luxury. For commoners, it was a defense against decay. For nobles, it was a ritual of identity. A noble woman steps into the shop, her white linen gown glowing softly in the dim light. She fans herself with a palm leaf, then points delicately to a jar. That one, she says. The one with the iris. The apothecary nods, his eyes lowering respectfully. Iris was sacred, believed to draw strength from both the sun and the earth. Using it in mouth care linked cleanliness with divine favor. You picture her later that evening, sitting before a bronze mirror, brushing with a frayed stick, whispering a short prayer to Hathor, goddess of beauty. You can almost hear the whisper, let my smile please the gods and my words please the living. Outside, the street fills with voices as the market day ends. Children chase each other, vendors pack up, and someone burns incense to keep mosquitoes away. The smoke curls lazily, mixing with the aroma of pepper and salt. A cat weaves through your legs, purring as if to approve the scent of freshly ground mint. You crouch to scratch its ear, and it rubs its head against your knee. Maybe even cats appreciate fresh breath. Historians still debate whether these ingredients were chosen scientifically or symbolically. Did the Egyptians notice the antiseptic effects of mint and iris, or did they just like the way they smelled? The answer, as always, is probably both. Science and symbolism were never enemies here. They were twin languages describing the same truth. What heals the body also purifies the soul. You walk past a cluster of young men gossiping outside a small tavern. One of them is laughing loudly, showing off teeth stained slightly red from beer mixed with date syrup. Another teases him. The gods will close your mouth if it smells like that. The group roars with laughter. It's a scene that could take place in any century. Friends poking fun, vanity wrapped in humor. But even jokes had weight here. Breath was a metaphor for life. In their creation myth, the god Atum formed the world by spitting and breathing existence into being. To the Egyptians, the mouth was sacred. It gave life through words and air. That's why they obsessed over keeping it pure. You weren't just scrubbing off last night's garlic, you were maintaining the machinery of creation itself. You pause by a stall selling tiny cones of perfumed resin. A woman crushes one in her hand, mixes it with powder, and says softly, "For my husband when he returns from the fields." You nod. Understanding more than she knows. Love, too, has always had a scent. As twilight deepens, the apothecaries light small oil lamps. Their flames flicker across jars and mortars, reflecting off glassy grains of salt. The sound of grinding softens, blending into the night chorus of crickets and distant river water. The men hum old work songs, their voices rising and falling like waves. You realize that in every handful of powder, there's a piece of the Nile itself, its salt, its plants, its stories. When they brushed their teeth, they weren't just cleaning. They were participating in a kind of microcosmic order. Each stroke of a twig reaffirmed their bond with nature, with gods, with the eternal cycle of decay and renewal. And maybe that's why the recipes survived. Whispered across generations, tucked into papyri and buried in tombs. Because they weren't just about hygiene, they were about hope. A hope that no matter how small the act, it could keep something beautiful alive. The lamps flicker lower. The apothecary yawns, dusts off his hands, and murmurs to you as he ties up the last bag of powder. Tomorrow, same sun, same sand, same teeth. You laugh quietly. He's right. Civilization might build monuments, invent alphabets, and conquer kingdoms. But in the end, everyone still wakes up worrying about their breath. You turn away, the smell of pepper and iris lingering in the night air. It's oddly comforting. As the stars blink awake above the river, you think, maybe history is just humanity brushing its teeth over and over, trying to start fresh. The night air cools, settling like a sheet over the city. You make your way toward the great temple complex. Its outer walls flicker with torchlight, and the murmur of chants drifts out through stone corridors. Here, within these sacred walls, the line between medicine and magic blurs completely. What you're about to see isn't just hygiene, it's ritual. At the entrance, a priest bows his shaved head to you. His skin gleams faintly with oil. His linen robe smells of frankincense and lotus. Purity begins at the mouth, he says softly, and leads you into the temple's inner chamber. The air is heavy with incense and chalk dust. Every surface seems to whisper. On a stone table lies a small array of tools, bowls, grinders, bundles of herbs, jars of ash, and scrolls marked with hieroglyphs so delicate they seem alive. This is where priests prepare mixtures, some for the gods, some for the body. You realize with quiet amazement that among those sacred recipes are dental formulas. The same care used for embalming pharaohs or blessing offerings was also used for crafting toothpaste. The priest dips his finger into a small alabaster bowl filled with a fine white powder. Salt from the Red Land, he explains, mixed with the flower that sees the sunrise. The flower, he means, is iris, its petals dried and ground to dust. To them, the iris was not just a plant, but a symbol of rebirth and the rising sun. When you used it in your mouth, it was like letting dawn pass your lips. He adds a few drops of oil pressed from sesame seeds, stirs, and hands you the bowl. Smell, he says. The scent hits sharply, salty, floral, slightly sour. It awakens the breath of Ra, he continues, and keeps the words of prayer clean. You nod, trying not to sneeze. The priests believe that spoken words have power, and that power can only flow from a clean vessel. Before reciting prayers, they rinse their mouths, scrub their teeth, and anoint their tongues with mint oil. Each morning begins this way. It's an act of devotion, but also one of confidence. Even gods, it seems, prefer articulate worshippers with fresh breath. Historians still argue whether this connection between speech and purity was spiritual, medical, or merely symbolic. The truth, as always, is layered. For the Egyptians, cleanliness was wholeness. To clean the mouth was to prepare the soul. You stand quietly as the priest chants a short hymn, his voice low and steady. The sound resonates against the stone, filling the chamber with warmth. When he finishes, he sets down the bowl and gestures to another scribe seated nearby. The young man's job is to record ingredients, ratios, and outcomes, an early form of scientific observation. Every time a priest found a combination that felt right or reduced pain, it was noted and passed down. You glance over his shoulder at the papyrus. The handwriting flows in elegant loops. Powder of iris, salt and mint for mouth sores. Powder of natron and pepper for decay of teeth. You blink. Decay of teeth, an acknowledgement that disease begins in the mouth. 5,000 years before modern dentistry, they already had a name for it. Another priest enters, carrying a tray of offerings, figs, bread, honey, and small jars labeled with symbols for breath and sweetness. These are meant for Hathor, the goddess of beauty and pleasure. But the connection is clear. Offerings that smell sweet represent the ideal of inner and outer harmony. A sweet mouth, a sweet soul. In a nearby alcove, you spot something surprising. A set of miniature tools made from bronze, tiny scrapers, hooks, and spatulas. They look suspiciously like dental instruments. One scribe tells you these are used to tend to the teeth of the living and the dead. The priests oversaw both. During mummification, they cleaned the mouths of the deceased, ensuring that even in the afterlife, their words would be pure. You take a moment to absorb that. Even the dead got dental care. Talk about commitment to oral hygiene. The priest smiles faintly at your expression. Everything begins with the mouth, he says, tapping his lips. We eat, speak, pray, and kiss life through it. To let it rot is to invite silence. His tone is calm, but his eyes gleam with conviction. You suddenly understand that for these people, brushing their teeth wasn't vanity, it was philosophy. Outside, the sounds of evening rise again. The creak of carts, the buzz of crickets, the slow lap of the river. The priests finish their preparations and store the powders in labeled jars. Each jar bears a symbol, an ankh for life, a feather for balance, an eye for protection. Their meanings weave together: life, harmony, vigilance. The same virtues that governed their religion governed their hygiene. One priest hums as he seals a jar with beeswax, muttering, "For the king's house." Another nods solemnly. Pharaohs were known to have their own private blends, made by temple specialists. The recipes were recorded on scrolls locked away in sanctuaries. To the uninitiated, they were prayers for the mouth. To us, they're the oldest dental prescriptions on earth. A small, almost comical thought crosses your mind. Somewhere out there, a royal accountant probably had to log toothpaste expenses in the treasury. 2 jars of natron and iris for His Majesty's radiant smile. Bureaucracy never dies. The moon climbs higher, spilling pale light over the courtyard as you step outside. The scent of mint and incense trails behind you. You hear faint laughter, priests teasing one another about whose mixture stings more. Even in the holiest of places, people can't resist comparing toothpaste brands. You walk along the temple wall, running your fingers over the carved hieroglyphs. Some depict offerings, some battles, but one scene catches your eye. A man holding a jar to his lips, the symbol for clean hovering above him. A small detail, but unmistakable. Cleanliness carved in stone, immortalized as part of the cosmic order. The wind cools. The river murmurs. Somewhere, far downstream, another priest begins his dawn ritual early, grinding salt and flour powder beneath the moonlight. The cycle never really stops here. The Nile flows, temples breathe, and Egypt's first toothpaste continues its quiet life as both medicine and mantra. You stand at the edge of the courtyard, breathing in the night air tinged with mint and stone dust. And it hits you. How much of this world survives in yours? Every squeeze of modern toothpaste, every swirl of foam, carries a faint echo of this moment. Salt, flour, devotion, and the endless human desire to keep decay at bay. The temple fades behind you as the first streaks of dawn bleed into the horizon. The air is cooler now, rippling with quiet anticipation. Somewhere beyond the palms, a rooster calls. The Nile stirs like a sleeping giant. You walk along the water's edge toward a grand complex rising from the mist, a royal estate where everything gleams, from polished limestone walls to servants' copper trays. Here, smiles aren't just expressions, they're symbols of divinity. The pharaoh's household begins to wake. Attendants shuffle through corridors, balancing jars of oils and powders. The smell is extraordinary. Lotus, honey, myrrh, salt, and something faintly metallic. You follow them into the royal dressing chamber. The light pours through carved shutters, pooling across a marble basin filled with water so clear it mirrors the ceiling's gold stars. There, seated calmly on a low stool, is a royal attendant, one of the pharaoh's personal caretakers. He holds a jar labeled with hieroglyphs meaning health of the mouth. Inside is a fine, pale gray powder, smoother than what villagers used. It was prepared the night before by temple scribes. The attendant dips a soft linen cloth into it and begins his morning duty, polishing the royal teeth. The pharaoh himself sits nearby, half awake, swathed in linen and gold. His expression is serene, but his eyes are sharp, commanding even in silence. The attendant brushes carefully, murmuring a short blessing under his breath. Strong as Ra, clean as the lotus, pure as the dawn, the pharaoh doesn't flinch. This is as routine to him as a general reviewing troops. The royal toothpaste has ingredients only the elite could afford. Powdered malachite for polish, salt from the Red Sea, and oil infused with lotus petals. Malachite was sacred, its green hue tied to rebirth and eternity. Using it wasn't just about shining teeth. It symbolized immortality. You watch as each stroke catches the morning light, turning the pharaoh's teeth into tiny mirrors of the sun god. A servant approaches with a silver bowl filled with mint water. The pharaoh rinses, spits delicately into a clay vessel, and gestures for the next step. A perfumer steps forward with a small reed brush, dipped in honey mixed with ground cinnamon. To sweeten the breath, she says. It's the finishing touch, the equivalent of an ancient breath mint. The scent fills the room, soft and warm. It's easy to imagine that somewhere, in the back of the royal mind, even the ruler of Egypt feared bad breath. No divine aura can hide halitosis during a diplomatic audience. Historians have found small jars like these in royal tombs, labeled for mouth ointments. Some even contain traces of mint and myrrh. It suggests that dental care wasn't only for the living, it accompanied the pharaoh into eternity. Cleanliness, they believed, carried over into the afterlife. If your mouth was pure, your soul could speak clearly before the gods during judgment. You turn as the queen enters, her attendants trailing like a flock of white egrets. Her smile is composed, deliberate. One maid brings a bowl of finely crushed pumice mixed with dried rose petals. The queen prefers gentler powders, the attendant explains. Too much salt, and she says it tastes like the desert. You can't help but grin, apparently. Even royal couples had differing opinions on toothpaste flavor. A court physician stands nearby, observing the procedure. He's tall, thin, and wears a leopard skin sash, the mark of medical authority. He records details on a strip of papyrus, proportions of ingredients, reactions, notes about gum sensitivity. His precision feels astonishingly modern. Later, those notes will be copied into temple archives, blending practical medicine with sacred wisdom. You lean closer to his writing and notice an interesting line. Powder to restore teeth loosened by age. Apply each morning with prayer. That simple sentence holds centuries of humanity inside it. The fear of aging, the hope of reversal, the belief that perhaps the gods could be persuaded to tighten a tooth. The court's atmosphere is calm but efficient. Servants move with the rhythm of routine. You can tell they've done this thousands of times. A young page carries a tray of fresh herbs, mint, thyme, and sweet rush. For the palace guests, he whispers. Even visitors were offered a small bowl of cleansing powder after meals, Egypt's earliest hospitality ritual. Forget after-dinner mints? They handed you salt and iris flower dust. As the ceremony ends, The pharaoh rises and glances toward the window. The sun fully crests the horizon, bathing the chamber in gold. He takes one last sip of water, sighs, and says, "The day is clean." The servants bow deeply. There's something both regal and human about it. A ruler starting his day the same way you do, just with more gold and better lighting. You follow him out into the courtyard, where palm trees sway gently. A scribe stands ready with a scroll, reciting the schedule of the day. Negotiations, rituals, processions, offerings. Through it all, the pharaoh's lips curve into faint, confident smiles. His mouth, the same one polished with pumice and perfume, will speak laws, prayers, and blessings before thousands. In this world, a clean mouth truly holds power. As the entourage moves on, a young servant gathers the used tools, reeds, bowls, linen cloths, and carries them away. He pauses by the basin, staring at the reflection of the sky on the water's surface. You wonder if he thinks about it too. How fragile this ritual is. How something as small as a speck of salt or a petal of iris could be connected to the machinery of empire. Outside the palace walls, life continues as always. Farmers grinding flour, children playing near the water, priests chanting in temples. Yet in both hut and palace, the same motion repeats. A hand raised to the mouth, a gentle scrub, a rinse, a small sense of order restored. Historians still debate whether these elite rituals influence the lower classes or vice versa. Did the pharaoh imitate the people, or did the people imitate the pharaoh? The evidence suggests it flowed both ways. Cleanliness, after all, was the great equalizer. Whether you wore linen or rags, you still faced the same sun, the same dust, the same desire to greet the morning unashamed. The day grows bright. The palace fades into a shimmer of gold behind you. The smell of mint lingers faintly in the air, mingling with the scent of clay and river reeds. You realize something quietly profound. No matter how grand the throne or how humble the hut, everyone starts their day the same way, mouth open, eyes half closed, chasing that fleeting illusion of freshness before the dust returns. You breathe deeply. Somewhere, a servant hums an old work song, steady, rhythmic, eternal. The Nile glitters like enamel in the sunlight. The land yawns awake again, and as you walk away, you can't help but think, for all our modern sophistication, we're still chasing the same thing the pharaohs did, one clean beginning before the long, messy day. The royal estate fades into the distance as you make your way back toward the city. Morning has become late morning, and the air vibrates with heat. The marketplace ahead is alive again. Merchants shouting prices, donkeys braying, pots clinking, a rhythm older than language itself. But above all that noise, you catch fragments of conversation about something rather odd, the breath of the gods. You follow the chatter to a small square beside a temple. There, a storyteller sits cross-legged, surrounded by a loose circle of workers, traders, and children. His hair is silver, his robe simple, but his voice, deep and slow, carries the weight of myth. When Ra, the sun god, opened his mouth to speak the first light, he begins. His breath smelled of life itself. The children lean closer. The old man smiles and continues. But when men began to forget the ways of cleanliness, the gods withdrew their sweet breath. And thus the world learned of foulness. You grin. It's an ancient parable about halitosis, dressed in divine robes. In the tale, bad breath wasn't just embarrassing, it was cosmic disorder. The gods' sweet breath symbolized harmony. Human stench, decay. To cleanse your mouth, therefore, wasn't merely vanity. It was an act of rebalancing the universe. A farmer beside you chuckles. So when my wife says I smell like the ox pen, I disturb the cosmos? He asks. The storyteller nods solemnly. Indeed, my son. And the cosmos is not pleased. The crowd burst into laughter. Even in antiquity, humor thrived best when it mocked itself. Historians still debate whether myths like these were moral lessons or simply entertainment, but either way, they worked. They made hygiene memorable, and they remind you that religion here wasn't distant. It lived in daily acts, in soap, in salt, even in toothpaste. As the laughter fades, the storyteller shifts his tone. There was once a scribe, he says, whose words were so foul that the ink curdled on the page. He prayed to Thoth, the god of writing, who said, "Clean your mouth as you clean your mind." So the scribe mixed natron, pepper and flour dust, brushed his teeth, and rewrote his life. The crowd hums in approval. You can tell they've heard the story before, but that's the beauty of it. Rituals need repetition. Nearby, a woman selling herbs joins in the conversation. The priests say even the gods chew mint, she says, half serious. Is it true? The storyteller winks. Only on holy days. The myth of divine breath appears in multiple Egyptian texts, and though its tone varies, the message is consistent. The mouth is sacred. It's where speech, nourishment, and spirit all flow. In the Book of the Dead, there's even a passage where the deceased prays, "May my mouth be opened that I may speak truth before the gods." In life, the same idea applied. An unclean mouth risked both physical decay and spiritual impurity. You wander away from the storyteller's crowd, your mind still echoing with that phrase, the breath of the gods. It sounds poetic, but you know there's a practical core beneath the myth. Egyptians noticed that certain ingredients, mint, myrrh, cinnamon, left the mouth feeling cool and fresh. The effect wasn't magic, just chemistry. Yet to them, the distinction didn't matter. If something made you feel cleaner, it was automatically closer to divine. A young boy darts past you, carrying a clay pot of crushed mint. He stops at a small shrine by the road, dips his finger into the mixture, and rubs it across his lips before running home. His grandmother, sitting nearby, nods approvingly. It's a household superstition. Applying mint at dawn keeps the gods' favor close. A kind of ancient breath prayer. You walk past a row of bakeries where workers knead dough, their hands white with flour. The air is thick with the smell of yeast and sand. Bread was the Egyptian staple, and the silent destroyer of their teeth. Every grain ground between stone querns picked up bits of grit. Over years, those tiny particles wore enamel down to the root. The irony is cruel. Their very sustenance became their decay, and yet rather than despair, they adapted. They sharpened their focus on the mouth. Their myths about bad breath weren't just jokes. They were coping mechanisms, a way to laugh at the pain. Imagine biting into bread that squeaked with grit and thinking, "Ah yes, the breath of the gods must be angry again." You stop at a stall selling small reed brushes. The vendor, an older woman with quick eyes, explains that people chew the ends until soft and dip them into their preferred mixture. The priests like salt and pepper, she says. The merchants, iris and mint. But the gods, she leans closer, lowering her voice, they like myrrh. Myrrh, she explains, was believed to carry both sweetness and bitterness, life and death in a single scent. It was used in toothpaste, perfume, and embalming. To brush with myrrh was to prepare for eternity, one mouthful at a time. She lets you sniff a jar. The scent is sharp, resinous, and warm. You close your eyes and imagine hundreds of years passing in that aroma. The same smell drifting through tombs, temples, and bedrooms alike. A civilization connected by the taste of spice and salt. You purchase a small packet from her, just for the feel of it, and tuck it into your robe. She grins. A traveler should always have clean breath, she says. You laugh softly, even when there's no one left to smell it. Especially then, she replies. The gods are never far. As the sun reaches its peak, the marketplace glows like a golden sea. Every conversation seems to echo the same quiet truth. The mouth is a gate, and to keep it clean is to keep the world in order. You realize that behind the laughter and exaggeration, there's an unspoken discipline here, one that links beauty, health, and faith into a single rhythm. Historians still argue whether myths like these began from religion or science, but standing here, watching people grind mint and laugh about divine halitosis, you suspect the answer is simpler, both. Humans have always turned discomfort into story, and story into purpose. It's what makes the unbearable, bearable. The storyteller's voice drifts again through the heat. And so, when you wake each morning and taste the river's dust on your tongue, remember Ra's first breath. Cleanse your mouth and you cleanse the world. You smile, feeling the line settle deep into your chest. The breath of the gods, a metaphor for the oldest kind of hope. That if you just start the day clean, maybe everything else will fall into place. The Nile wind stirs gently. You taste a bit of salt on your lips, and for a fleeting moment you could almost believe the gods are breathing right back. The sun hangs high over the river now, casting short shadows and bleaching every color to pale gold. You walk slowly, your sandals stirring dust, until the city gives way to open fields. Out here, far from temples and markets, life is quieter, but not simpler. You hear the hum of bees, the rustle of papyrus reeds, and the dull thud of wood striking stone. Following the sound, you find a small workshop half buried in reeds. where a group of men are bent over wooden benches. They're not sculptors or scribes. They're the world's earliest dentists. One of them, an older man with careful hands and a patient face, glances up as you approach. "We mend what is lost," he says, "and pull what is cursed." His name, according to a faint carving on a nearby stone, is Hygiene. You've heard of him before. Scribes recorded his title thousands of years later, chief of dentists and physicians, the first dentist in history with a name. And here he is, alive in the shimmer of imagination, surrounded by the tools of his trade. The tools look more like surgical weapons: bronze tweezers, small chisels, hooked needles, and thin cords for tying. He holds one up to the light, smiling faintly. "They call these the keys to silence," he says. "If the pain is too loud, we open the mouth and remove it." You wince just hearing that. There's no anesthesia here, only chants, herbal salves, and the occasional fainting spell. Yet people still come, desperate for relief from abscesses, broken molars, and the slow grind of sand-filled bread. One patient, a middle-aged farmer, sits on a low stool with his head tilted back, eyes shut. Hygiene dips a reed in honey mixed with crushed garlic, spreads it on the man's swollen gum, and waits. "Sweet to calm, bitter to cure," he mutters. Garlic kills bacteria. Honey fights infection. Science disguised as faith. Historians still argue whether Hygiene truly performed surgical dentistry or merely prescribed poultices. But evidence from skeletons shows attempts at primitive drilling and binding. In one skull, archaeologists found traces of linen thread used to stabilize loose teeth, proof that someone, somewhere, tried to save a smile instead of surrendering it. Behind the main table, an apprentice grinds salt and iris flower petals into a fine powder. He hums as he works. Hygiene watches him with quiet pride. "The powder keeps the mouth clean after pain," he explains. "Pain attracts rot. Cleanliness drives it away. You can see how easily medicine and ritual blurred here, each step half cure, half prayer." A jar nearby holds small strips of dried palm fiber soaked in resin. These were likely used as makeshift splints or even early fillings. You pick one up carefully. It smells faintly of myrrh and smoke. "For the noble mouths," the apprentice says. "They like gold, but resin lasts longer." You laugh softly. Even in ancient Egypt, practicality sometimes trumped luxury. Hygiene's workspace is orderly, almost reverent. Each tool sits on linen, wiped clean after every use. He pauses often to wash his hands in a bowl of natron water, then dries them on a reed mat. You realize he's following a code, one that will echo through medicine for millennia: cleanliness as protection. He beckons you closer to show a patient's tooth extracted earlier that morning. The root is jagged, blackened with decay. "Too much sand," he says simply. "Too much age." He drops it into a small clay jar. You peek inside. Dozens of teeth rattle softly within, a grim collection of Egypt's silent sufferers. And yet there's dignity here. Pain is acknowledged, not hidden. A woman enters holding her cheek. She sits with surprising calm. Hygiene mixes a new salve, ground barley, honey, and a drop of lotus oil. The smell is sweet, comforting. He applies it with a reed, murmuring words that sound like a lullaby. "May your mouth open again to joy," he says. The woman exhales slowly, her face softening. The power of suggestion, the placebo of kindness. It's medicine older than time. In one corner, another patient nervously chews a twig while waiting his turn. You sit beside him. "Does it hurt much?" You ask. He shrugs. "Only for a moment. The pain leaves, the gods forgive, and I can eat again." He grins, revealing more gaps than teeth. Besides, who can live without smiling? That line lingers. Who can live without smiling? It's easy to forget that dentistry began not as a science, but as a fight against silence. When your mouth hurt, you couldn't speak, laugh, pray, or eat. Fixing teeth wasn't about vanity. It was about restoring humanity. Later, Hygiene takes you to a small alcove where clay tablets line the walls, each etched with short inscriptions. "Instructions for those who follow," he says. You lean in and read, "When the tooth aches, rub with pepper and onion. When the gums bleed, press salt and iris. When breath turns foul, rinse with beer and mint." You blink. It's astonishingly detailed, an entire dental manual compressed into a handful of lines. Outside, the sky hums with the sound of cicadas. Hygiene closes his workshop for the afternoon, covering his tools with a linen cloth. He wipes his hands one last time and smiles. "The gods may make us in their image," he says, "but they did not spare us our mouths." You walk with him to the water's edge. He rinses his hands and mouth with care, then dips a stick into a jar of powder, brushing in small, practiced strokes. You realize you're witnessing something timeless, the healer healing himself. He catches you staring. You think it's strange? He asks. You shake your head. No, familiar. He chuckles, handing you the twig. Then you understand. To care for another, you must first know the taste of ash and salt yourself. The wind picks up, rippling across the reeds. You glance at the reflection of the sky on the river. It looks like enamel, shimmering faintly in the light. For a moment, the world feels still. Hessie places the jar of teeth beside him like an offering and whispers something inaudible to the water. You imagine it's a prayer, not for the dead teeth, but for the living who still bear them. And as you walk away, the rhythmic sounds of grinding stone and murmured blessings follow you like an ancient lullaby. The first dentist's workshop fades into the heat, but his wisdom lingers. That even the smallest act of care, washing, brushing, easing pain, is a defiance against decay, a rebellion made of patience. The path takes you inland, away from the river, through stretches of dry grass and low acacia trees. You hear birdsong and the soft buzz of beetles in the heat. But above all, you hear the rhythmic scraping of something against stone. As you crest a dune, you spot the source, a group of villagers sitting under the shade of a sycamore tree, each chewing on a thin twig until its fibers fray into soft bristles. You've reached the era of the chewing stick, the ancestor of the modern toothbrush. Long before nylon bristles and ergonomic handles, this was how the world brushed its teeth, with patience, pressure, and plants. One man waves to you, grinning through a mouth that's missing a tooth or two. You came to chew? He jokes, holding out a spare twig. You take it, twirling it between your fingers. It smells faintly of wood and resin, and when you bite down, the tip splinters gently, releasing a tangy, earthy taste. The fibers become soft, almost brush-like. Palm, he says proudly. Soft enough for children, strong enough for old bones. Historians believe Egyptians used several types of sticks: palm, tamarind, and Salvadora persica, the same tree still used for miswak today. Its sap contains natural antiseptics and fluoride-like minerals, though no one back then could have named them. They just knew it worked. When you chew one, your mouth tingles, gums tighten, and the breath sharpens. You watch as a mother teaches her daughter how to use the stick. Light, circular motions, not too hard, or you'll hurt the gums. Let it dance, not fight, she says. The girl nods solemnly, her little hand clumsy but eager. It's a tiny moment of tenderness, one generation passing a survival tool to the next. Nearby, a man sharpens a bundle of fresh sticks with a small copper knife. Each one is cut to the length of a palm, smoothed along the sides, and soaked briefly in water to soften. We keep them by the door, he tells you. Before prayer, after food, before sleep. You realize these aren't hygiene rules, they're spiritual checkpoints. Every act of brushing aligns the day, marking its rhythm. Eat, clean, rest, repeat. You try using the stick properly, following his motions. The taste is peculiar, woody, bitter, with a hint of sap sweetness. The friction grates against your teeth, rough but satisfying. After a few strokes, your mouth feels cleaner. You spit a bit of dust and one of the men laughs. See? The sand leaves, the breath returns. Somewhere nearby, a woman hums while washing herbs in a bowl. She grinds a few and sprinkles them onto her stick before brushing, mint and crushed pepper for freshness. Another dips her twig into honey mixed with salt. The mixture glistens in the sunlight, golden and strange. For love, she says mischievously. You raise an eyebrow and she grins. Sweet breath makes sweet husbands. It's both science and superstition, and you can't help but admire how seamlessly they blend. The chewing stick isn't just a tool, it's a social bond, an everyday reminder that care is communal. You chew together, laugh together, and carry the same scent of mint and wood wherever you go. A young boy sitting near you breaks his stick in half and points at your modern-looking clothes. Yours are strange, he says. Do your people still chew? You smile. In another way. He nods thoughtfully, then says, our sticks will last longer. He's probably right. Historians still argue whether Egyptians invented the first toothbrush or merely perfected an older idea, but either way they made it practical. The sticks were small enough to carry, disposable, and often scented. Tomb paintings show them tucked into belts like pens, a detail so casual you'd miss it if you didn't know what you were looking for. As the day burns hotter, the villagers share water from a clay jug, passing it from hand to hand. Everyone rinses their mouth before drinking, an instinctive act of respect. Clean water deserves a clean mouth, one of them says. It's the kind of wisdom you'd expect from philosophers, not farmers. A traveler joins the group, his beard dusty from the road. He takes a stick, chews it once, then sighs with relief. Ah, the taste of home, he murmurs. That's the thing about rituals like this. They make the world feel smaller. Wherever you are, the taste of mint and wood tells you you're part of something ancient. Something that stretches across miles and millennia. As you rest beneath the tree, you notice a faint groove carved into the wood near where the villagers sit. It's shaped like a mouth, simple, smiling, half worn away by time. Perhaps someone carved it as a joke, or perhaps it's a quiet tribute to the act of cleansing. Either way, it feels intimate, like graffiti left by time itself. One old man finishes brushing and looks up at you. You know, he says softly, the mouth is clever. It eats, it kisses, it prays, but it can betray you too. He taps his lips. So we keep it clean, to remind it who's master. You smile at the wisdom hidden in his humor. The wind shifts, carrying the scent of papyrus and distant water. You realize that what you're seeing here, the twigs, the laughter, the simple ritual, isn't a primitive habit, but a philosophy in motion. It's mindfulness before the word existed. Every stroke of the stick says, I am alive, and I care enough to keep myself in order. You chew your stick one last time, feeling the taste fade from sharp to faintly sweet. The villagers gather their bundles, heading back to their fields, twigs tucked behind their ears or tied in small bundles at their waists. The sun gleams on the horizon, bright and indifferent. Yet these people, in their quiet way, have found a method to tame it, to meet each day's dust with their own small defense of cleanliness and grace. As you walk away, the stick still between your teeth, you realize how oddly comforting it is to think that somewhere, 5,000 years ago, people sat under a tree exactly like this, laughing between mouthfuls of wood and pepper, just trying to start fresh. You leave the grove behind, the taste of wood still lingering faintly on your tongue. The path takes you toward a cluster of huts that smell like sun-baked clay and honey. A few women sit outside stirring something in shallow bronze pans, their motions slow, deliberate, unhurried. From where you stand, it looks like melted amber catching the light. When one of them lifts her ladle, the scent hits you, warm, sweet, faintly herbal. It's honey, but not the kind you drizzle on bread. This is honey meant for the mouth. Come closer, an older woman says, her face lined but kind. This keeps the mouth soft and the heart young. She dips her finger into the syrup and touches it to her lips, then passes you the ladle. You taste it carefully, thick, golden, tinged with a sharp note of thyme. It fights the heat and the pain, she adds, and makes a husband forget the smell of beer. The others laugh quietly, the sound like dry leaves rustling. Honey was Egypt's gift to the world. They used it for food, medicine, and, yes, mouthwash. Mixed with water, it soothed gums and freshened breath. Mixed with vinegar, it cleaned teeth. When combined with herbs or salt, it became an antiseptic paste. Modern science later confirmed what they learned through experience. Honey kills bacteria and draws out infection. One of the younger women explains her recipe. Boil honey with mint, she says. Add a pinch of salt and swish. Don't swallow, you'll waste the god's sweetness. You watch her pour the mixture into small clay bottles, each stoppered with papyrus. She'll sell them at the market tomorrow, a local remedy passed down through generations. A boy sits nearby, chewing a twig dipped in honey, humming contentedly. The older woman shakes her head, amused. He only brushes when it tastes sweet, she sighs. It's an ancient parental complaint, one that hasn't aged a day. You squat by the fire, listening to them talk. Their laughter is soft, but there's pride underneath it. We learned from the bees, the eldest woman says. They keep their homes clean, and so must we. She gestures toward a clay hive half hidden by reeds. The bees are the pharaohs of purity. In the distance, a farmer approaches carrying jars of thick, dark liquid. Palm wine, he says, offering a sample. The women refuse politely. One explains that strong drink ruins the sweetness of the mouth. You suspect she's partly right. Alcohol was both tonic and toxin in this climate. Even then, people linked what they drank to how they felt in the morning. Historians still debate how widespread the use of honey mouthwash was. Some believe it was a luxury of the middle class. Others think it trickled down from temple medicine. The truth, as you watch this scene unfold, is probably both. A remedy this simple doesn't stay secret for long. The women pass around a shallow bowl filled with cool water and a few floating mint leaves. Each takes a sip, swirls it in her mouth, and spits delicately into the dust. The ritual feels almost elegant. The honey draws out the bad, one explains. The mint calls in the good. It's a cleansing balanced between sweetness and sting, a perfect Egyptian metaphor. You notice a few jars marked with faint symbols, one shaped like a bee, another like a tongue. These aren't trademarks, just practical mnemonics for illiterate buyers, but they hint at something deeper, the beginnings of brand identity. Even in 1500 BCE, someone understood that a recognizable symbol could sell more paste. One of the younger women leans toward you. "The priests say honey is the blood of Ra," she whispers, eyes wide. "It shines with his warmth." You nod slowly, remembering how everything sacred here loops back to the sun. Perhaps that's why honey, with its golden glow and eternal shelf life, felt divine. It didn't spoil. It endured. To taste it was to borrow a little immortality. As the afternoon drifts on, the women clean their bowls and stack the jars neatly. A soft hum rises from their voices, a work song about bees returning home. The rhythm is slow, circular, hypnotic. You find yourself swaying slightly, lulled by it. The elder catches your expression and smiles. "We sing so the honey remembers the flowers," she says. You like that? Words that could belong in a poem or a lab notebook. It's both superstition and insight. Before you leave, she fills a small jar for you. "A traveler should keep sweetness close," she says, pressing it into your hand. The honey glows against your palm, warm from the sun. You tuck it into your pack, feeling its weight. Light, but somehow significant. As you walk back toward the river, the air shifts. The dry heat gives way to a cooler breeze carrying the scent of lotus and smoke. You dip your fingers into the jar and taste the honey again. Beneath the sweetness, there's a trace of salt, perhaps from the maker's own sweat. It reminds you of something simple yet profound, that all comfort, even this, is built from labor. Someone had to stir the sweetness from bitterness to turn sting into balm. The Nile glimmers in the distance, and your reflection wavers in its current. You imagine thousands of others doing the same thing at this very hour, swirling honey, rinsing, spitting, laughing. 5,000 years from now, we'll give the ritual a new name, self-care. But it will still be the same act, driven by the same quiet hope, that we can wash away yesterday's dust and taste, however briefly, something clean and kind. By late afternoon, the sun hangs low and thick, painting the horizon in bronze and rose. You walk along the edge of the river where papyrus reeds bend in slow rhythm, and the hum of insects rises like static. Somewhere ahead, the air grows faintly bitter, a mix of herbs, resin, and something darker. You follow it to a small clay hut marked with a symbol scratched above the door, a crooked tooth beside the Ankh of life. Inside, a healer works. He's not a priest, not a physician of the royal courts. He's something between the village problem solver, the one people visit when neither prayer nor patience will help. His hands are stained with ochre, and his table cluttered with strange ingredients. Dried figs, onion skins, salt, and something that looks suspiciously like crocodile fat. "Sit," he says, gesturing to a reed mat. "You have pain in the mouth, yes?" You open your mouth to explain that you're just visiting, but he's already rummaging through jars, muttering under his breath. "The tooth is a jealous bone," he says. "When it hurts, it wants the whole body to suffer." You glance around. The walls are lined with scroll fragments, bits of medical papyri with drawings of jaws and hieroglyphic notes. The most famous of these, historians would later call the Ebers Papyrus. Dating around 1550 BCE, it includes dozens of dental remedies, each stranger than the last. Powders of ground barley mixed with honey, mouthwashes made of beer and cumin, and ointments containing, yes, crocodile fat. Apparently, the ancients saw a connection between the crocodile's fierce bite and human tooth strength. Logic by symbolism, the oldest kind. The healer grinds ingredients in a stone bowl, murmuring a short incantation. "Tooth of stone, gum of earth, pain of wind, go." The rhythm of it is strangely soothing, part spell, part lullaby. He adds a pinch of pepper and a splash of vinegar, forming a paste thick as clay. "Apply here," he says, touching his own jaw, "until the gods grow tired of your complaining." You almost laugh. It's an oddly practical prayer. As he works, you notice his tools. Slender reeds for application, small bronze hooks, bundles of herbs tied with string. Each tool looks worn smooth from decades of use. The hut smells of mint and smoke, sharp but oddly comforting, like a pharmacy mixed with a campfire. He motions for you to watch as another patient enters, clutching her cheek. "A spirit in the molar," she whispers. He nods seriously, not to humor her, but because the metaphor makes sense. The Egyptians believed illness was a form of imbalance or invasion, sometimes by unseen forces, sometimes by decay itself. The line between spirit and symptom blurred easily. But his treatment is practical. He softens a clove of garlic in warm honey, presses it into the woman's mouth, and ties a strip of cloth under her chin to hold it in place. Garlic's sulfur kills bacteria. Honey prevents infection. 2,000 years before germ theory, they were already winning small battles against it. Historians still argue whether this healer's kind were truly doctors or more like herbal shamans. The papyri suggest both. They mixed prayer with pragmatism, faith with fermentation. To them, medicine wasn't a choice between science and spirit. It was simply everything that worked. You lean closer to read one of the scroll fragments pinned to the wall. The script is old, faded, but you can still make out the words. "If a tooth is loose, pound sycamore bark with beer and place it upon the gum." You grin slightly. Beer is medicine, humanity's oldest excuse. But it makes sense. The yeast acted as a mild disinfectant and the alcohol numbed the pain. Every sip a prescription. The healer's apprentice, a young man with quick hands, asks him quietly, "Master, what if the tooth cannot be saved?" The old man sighs. "Then we bury it with salt and honey, so the next one will grow sweeter." You suspect that's more comfort than cure, but it's a kind thought nonetheless. You step outside for air. The sky burns red over the fields, and the sound of frogs begins to thrum from the reeds. Behind you, you can still hear the rhythmic grinding of the mortar. It sounds almost like a heartbeat. A few villagers wait their turn by the door, murmuring to each other. One woman holds a small jar. "For my husband," she says softly. He grinds his teeth like stones in the night. The healer's apprentice takes it with a knowing nod. "Ah," he says. Then he dreams of battles. You smile at that. Maybe he's not wrong. Even now we grind our teeth over stress we can't name. Perhaps some habits never evolve. They just find new vocabulary. As darkness deepens, the healer lights a small oil lamp and whispers a closing prayer to Sekhmet, goddess of healing. The flame flickers and throws shadows over the jars. For a moment, the hut feels like a miniature temple. Not to gods, but to the fragile human mouth, that small, troublesome gate between life and death. He looks up and catches your gaze. "You think we are foolish?" he asks. You shake your head. "No, just early." He laughs, low and warm. "Early," he repeats. "That is a good word." The laughter fades, replaced by the hum of the night. He places the last of the day's ingredients back into their jars and seals them with wax. "Everything that heals," he says quietly, "must also taste bad." You grin. Some things, it seems, never change. Outside, the moon rises, pale and full, mirrored in the dark sweep of the Nile. Somewhere out there, another healer grinds the same herbs, whispers the same charm, and hopes it still works. You stand by the riverbank a moment longer, feeling the cool air brush your face, and realize that this small war against pain, fought with honey, garlic, and faith, is one of the most human battles ever waged. Night melts quietly into dawn, and the air carries a damp chill. You wake to the sound of chanting, low, rhythmic, almost like humming bees. The smell of burning myrrh and mint fills the temple courtyard. You follow the sound until it leads you to a row of priests kneeling before small basins, each washing their hands, faces, and mouths in slow sequence. The water glints faintly, scented with something floral. As one priest lifts a jar, you catch the fragrance unmistakably: mint, myrrh, and iris flower. The mix is familiar now, the cornerstone of Egyptian cleanliness, used in both life and death. The priest swished the liquid carefully, spit it into the sand, and whisper blessings that sound almost like sighs. Then, dipping their fingers into a powder of dried petals, they rub it gently along their gums. To sweeten words before dawn, one murmurs. You sit quietly and watch. There's no rush in their motions. Each act seems to belong to the rhythm of sunrise itself. In this civilization, where every morning was both work and worship, the mouth became a temple gate. You begin to understand why so many of their formulas, mint for purity, myrrh for preservation, iris for beauty, appeared both in hygiene and in embalming. Cleanliness of the living mirrored preservation of the dead. Historians still argue whether this connection was symbolic or practical. Were they cleaning teeth for health or preparing the soul for eternity? Perhaps both. Egyptian duality rarely separated the two. The same resin that sealed a mummy's lips against decay also soothed the living mouth against pain. One priest, older and stooped, notices your curiosity. He gestures for you to come closer. The breath of the living feeds the ka, he says, referencing the soul force that lingered after death. If the mouth is pure, the soul may speak clearly to the gods. He opens a small alabaster jar and shows you its contents, a fine gray powder flecked with dried herbs. This we use for the dead as well. Their mouths must open sweetly when Osiris calls. You can't help but smile. The Egyptians gave the afterlife dental care. Their mummies weren't only wrapped for eternity, they were perfumed and polished, their mouths sealed with mixtures meant to last forever. Myrrh and mint weren't just preservatives, they were symbols of continuity. To keep the body whole, even in scent, was to promise that memory itself would not rot. He hands you a small piece of resin. Smell, he says. It's earthy and sweet, with that deep, ancient warmth myrrh always carries. Half medicine, half nostalgia. This is the breath of peace, he adds. When the body sleeps forever, it dreams in this scent. You picture the tombs you've seen in museums, the jars of unguents, the packets of herbs labeled for the mouth, the faint, resinous smell still clinging to the wrappings after thousands of years. Those fragrances weren't random, they were continuity in physical form. When you brushed your teeth with mint and myrrh, you weren't just cleaning. You were aligning yourself with the same cycle that embalmed kings. Life and death met at the tongue. The priests begin preparing offerings, bowls of bread, honey, figs, and fragrant oils. A young acolyte drops a few sprigs of dried mint into the oil bowl. The older priest nods approvingly. Even the gods appreciate freshness, he says with a wink. You can't tell if he's joking or not, but his tone makes you laugh quietly anyway. Nearby, a scribe copies a passage from the ritual of opening the mouth, the ceremony performed on mummies to restore their ability to speak and eat in the afterlife. You lean closer and read, "May my mouth be opened, that I may speak truth before the gods, my breath pure, my tongue steady." The line sends a small shiver through you. The connection is direct. Hygiene is resurrection. Cleanliness is communication. To keep your mouth clean was to keep your voice alive. The priest notices your attention and says softly, "The mouth opens to truth, or to rot. One must choose daily." His words settle like dust in the air, simple but strangely modern. A group of attendants arrive carrying bundles of herbs and resin. They grind the mix into paste using heavy stones, singing as they work. The song rises and falls in cadence with their grinding. You catch fragments of the lyrics, mint for the heart, myrrh for the breath, iris for the journey beyond. It's work music, but also a hymn. Later, as the priests begin the embalming of a recently deceased nobleman, you're allowed to watch from a respectful distance. The air inside the chamber is cool and thick with incense. One attendant gently anoints the body's mouth with a mix of honey, myrrh, and lotus oil. Another inserts small packets of herbs behind the lips. To speak beautifully before Osiris, one says. The body gleams faintly in lamplight, its stillness made dignified by care. You realize that for them there was no separation between grooming the living and tending the dead. It was the same act, only performed at a different temperature. To cleanse the body, whether breathing or silent, was to honor its divine design. When the ritual ends, the head priest dips his hand into a bowl of mint water, swishes it briefly, and spits it into the sand before leaving. "We clean ourselves after we clean the dead," he explains, "so we do not take their silence home." You nod, understanding. In their world, cleanliness was both protection and release. As you step back into the courtyard, The first true light of morning spills over the walls. The smell of myrrh lingers in your hair, warm and resinous like something eternal refusing to fade. You take a deep breath and exhale slowly, mint, myrrh, and iris, the same trio that scented temples, mummies, and mouths. Somewhere between perfume and prayer, medicine and myth, they kept a civilization breathing sweetly for 3,000 years. And as you walk away from the temple, the chant still echoing faintly behind you, you think perhaps immortality doesn't live in stone pyramids or golden tombs, but in something smaller, the shared breath of the living, fragrant, fleeting, and endlessly renewed. You leave the temple as the sun climbs, the air already warm enough to shimmer. The faint sweetness of myrrh still clings to your robe as you wander through a narrow street lined with potters, bakers, and blacksmiths. The sounds of hammers and laughter mingle together. Then you spot a small group gathered near an open courtyard, where a scholar gestures toward a table covered in bones. Not just any bones, skulls. You edge closer. The scholar, thin and sunburnt, wears a faded linen sash that marks him as a student of medicine. He holds up one skull to the light, tracing a crack along its jaw. "See here?" he says. The tooth tells the tale. Everyone leans in. "This one," he continues, "belonged to a man who ate sand with every loaf. His teeth wore away like stones in the river. But this one," he holds up another, "was a man of softer food, a scribe perhaps. Less wear, but decay here near the gum. Too much honey," he's right. Modern archaeologists have confirmed exactly that. Ancient Egyptian skeletons carry the entire biography of their diets in their mouths. Bread grit carved deep grooves into enamel, while high-status diets rich in honey and beer led to cavities. The scholar tilts the skull gently, sunlight catching the worn surfaces. "Our teeth," he says softly, "are our scrolls. They write without ink. You feel a small chill despite the heat. There's something both eerie and beautiful about the idea. Every meal, every laugh, every careless bite preserved as history in bone." The scholar sets the skull down carefully and dips a reed pen into ink. On a sheet of papyrus, he draws a rough diagram. A human jaw, its teeth labeled not with numbers but with hieroglyphs: grinder, cutter, singer. You notice one symbol repeated beside several teeth, the sign for life. He looks up and explains, "We chew life. That's why the gods placed us between silence and speech." Behind him, a young apprentice grinds pigments in a small bowl. "For the drawing," he explains. "We color the worn places red. The pigment is hematite, iron oxide, the same powder used for lipstick and temple murals." The scholar dips his brush and paints small red stains where cavities had eaten through the enamel. It's half diagram, half confession. Historians still debate how much these ancient medics understood about the causes of decay. They didn't know bacteria, but they observed patterns. Gritty food meant wear, sweets meant pain, beer meant swelling. In their own way, they were epidemiologists without microscopes. "We don't need to see the worm," the scholar says, "to know it's there." Indeed, Egyptians believed toothaches came from tiny, invisible worms living inside the teeth, a belief that would persist all the way into medieval Europe. A baker from the crowd laughs nervously. "So my bread breeds worms?" The scholar shrugs. "The bread or the stones you grind it with. Either way, chew gently." The crowd disperses, but you linger, drawn by curiosity. The apprentice rinses the bones in clear water, then lays them in the sun to dry. "The wind will read them now," he says absently. You ask if he believes that. "Why not?" he replies. The mouth speaks, even when it's gone. He gestures toward a row of skulls set on the wall. The teeth glint faintly in the sunlight. Some worn flat, some chipped, some still sharp. It's a macabre smile, but somehow it feels peaceful. You remember that for Egyptians, nothing was ever truly dead if it could still be named or remembered. These teeth, stripped of flesh, still held identity. They were relics of meals, songs, arguments, and laughter. You half expect them to whisper if you listen hard enough. The scholar begins sorting them by age and wear. "See how the young grind with vigor, the old with wisdom," he says. He points to one tooth ground down nearly to the gum line. "This one tells of endurance." He pauses, then grins faintly. "And perhaps poor milling stones." He turns back to his notes, recording in careful script. "Sand destroys enamel. Soft bread invites rot. Salt purifies. Iris cools. Beer numbs. Pepper awakens. It's not far from a modern research paper, minus the footnotes. You realize how deeply observation has always driven understanding. Nearby, a merchant overhears and chuckles. "So the gods punish all who eat," he jokes. The scholar doesn't miss a beat. "No," he says. "They teach balance. Every sweetness must meet salt." The answer feels ancient and modern at once, a philosophy disguised as diet advice. A breeze drifts through the courtyard carrying the scent of baked bread. You imagine how every loaf, every meal shaped their bodies the way water shapes stone. Even their smiles bore the fingerprints of their civilization. The scholar carefully stacks the skulls and covers them with linen, then nods to you. "We are what we chew," he says simply. "And when we stop chewing, the gods read what we wrote." It's a line that sticks in your mind long after you leave. You walk along the edge of the fields where farmers thresh grain under the sun. Each strike of the flail sends up small clouds of dust, fine, sharp, inescapable. You taste it on the air, feel it against your teeth, and understand in your bones why every Egyptian recipe began with salt and ended with cleaning. By the time you reach the river again, the light has softened. Children play by the water, splashing and laughing, their teeth gleaming white in the glow. Their smiles for now are untouched by sand and time. You can't help but wonder how many of those teeth will one day be studied, sketched, catalogued. Tiny pieces of history disguised as grins. The scholar's words echo back to you. Our teeth are our scrolls. Maybe that's what all this brushing and grinding has been about, trying to write something worth remembering. You cup your hands in the river, rinse your mouth, and spit softly into the current. The water carries it away, mingling with the dust, the honey, the mint. A gesture so small it disappears instantly. Yet it connects you, across thousands of years, to every Egyptian who ever did the same. The next morning rises quiet and hazy. The desert air tastes of dust and heat before the sun even clears the horizon. You wake to the sounds of grinding stones again, the old familiar rasp that means breakfast is being born. The bakers are already at work, sleeves rolled up, faces dusted white like statues come alive. The smell of baking bread fills the air, nutty, warm, comforting, and you can almost forget what you learned yesterday. Almost. You watch the women kneel beside large grinding slabs, pushing heavy stones back and forth over heaps of barley. Each stroke releases a puff of fine powder that glitters in the dawn light. They cough occasionally, wipe their faces, and keep going. "It's the taste of home," one of them says cheerfully. But you know what else it is? Powdered rock, ground from the very querns they're using. Every loaf carries a little sand with it, invisible grit that wears teeth away year after year. The Egyptian smile, scholars say, was short-lived. Worn enamel, abscesses, and infections filled their bones. You imagine those perfect murals of men and women laughing, banqueting, showing perfect rows of teeth, and realize the painters were merciful liars. A young boy sits beside his mother, shaping the small dough balls that will become the day's bread. He hums a tune, proud of his work. "He'll be a strong one," his mother says. You nod politely, though you can't help noticing the boy's teeth, small chips along the edges already forming. It's not neglect. It's just nature and necessity conspiring together. The family's breakfast is a study in survival. Bread, onions, a small jug of beer. Each bite carries sustenance and sand in equal measure. You take a small piece, chew carefully, and immediately feel the grit between your molars. It crunches like glass. You grimace instinctively, but they all laugh. "Soft teeth," the father teases. He's not wrong. You're the visitor here, soft from a time of polished flour and fluoride. These people live in partnership with imperfection. They know decay as an old companion, not an enemy. Later, you follow a group of laborers walking toward the worksite near a half-built tomb. Each carries tools, water, and a small bundle of food wrapped in linen. Their laughter fills the path. One of them jokes, "Eat fast, or the dust will eat first." The others roar. Humor, as always, survives where comfort does not. They pause by the river to rinse their mouths before eating. One man scoops water, swishes vigorously, spits into the reeds, and chews on a twig dipped in salt. "Otherwise," he says, "the stones in the bread become stones in the teeth." You grin. Primitive dental logic, but perfectly true. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians understood the full link between their bread and their dental misery. There's no surviving treatise on sand erosion, but the evidence is everywhere, in the worn molars of mummies, In the powders of salt and pumice they added to toothpaste, perhaps without realizing they were worsening the problem. Cleanliness and destruction, locked in the same grain. You stop to examine one of the querns, still warm from grinding. The stone surface glitters faintly with quartz. You run your finger along it. It's rough, uneven, like a riverbed that has forgotten water. Imagine years of use, thousands of hands, endless bread. How many teeth did this one stone silently destroy? The overseer shouts something in the distance. Time to resume work. The laborers rise, dusting themselves off. You follow them as they return to hauling limestone blocks, their laughter fading into the heat. A woman nearby sells figs from a basket. You buy one and bite carefully. The sweetness explodes on your tongue, pure relief after the bread. She chuckles softly. "You have the mouth of a noble," she says. "Too soft for work." You shrug, accepting the compliment, or insult, depending on tone. "Maybe," you say, "but I'll still brush tonight." She laughs harder. "Then you are wiser than most nobles." You think back to all those ancient recipes: pepper, mint, salt, iris. Each promised to fight decay, but none could undo the daily damage of sand and stone. Still, they tried. Maybe that's the real story of Egyptian toothpaste. Not perfection, but persistence. As noon approaches, the wind picks up, carrying fine dust across the plain. It coats your skin, your hair, your teeth. You rub your tongue against your molars and feel the familiar grit again. There's no escaping it. The desert gets inside everything, even you. In the distance, a young scribe sits beneath a palm, writing on a scroll. You wander over. "Recording rations," he explains. "Bread for workers, wheat for temples, barley for offerings." He pauses, frowns, and scratches a small note in the margin. You glance at it. It reads, "Complaints of aching teeth among stone cutters." You smile faintly. The first workplace dental report in history, perhaps. He looks up, squinting. "You know," he says, "they say the gods gave us bread to live and sand to remind us that life costs something." He shrugs. It's fair. You think about that as you head back toward the river. The world around you hums with quiet industry. Stones dragged, loaves baked, mouths rinsed. Everything wears down, teeth, tools, people, but everything keeps moving. Maybe that was Egypt's true endurance. Not in monuments, but in mouths that never stopped chewing. You pause at the water's edge and rinse again, letting the sand flow out. The reflection staring back at you looks ancient for a moment, mouth streaked with dust and sunlight. Somewhere behind you, the bakers sing softly to their grinding rhythm, and the sound blends perfectly with the whisper of the Nile. The bread sustains, the sand destroys, and between them, humans learn patience. The afternoon light softens to amber as you leave the fields behind and wander into the noble quarter, where the air smells faintly of lotus oil and polished copper. Here the walls are higher, the streets cleaner, and the voices quieter. People move with a certain rhythm of grace, as though the world were built to serve their composure. You follow the faint ring of laughter to a small open courtyard. Inside, two women sit before a mirror of polished bronze, its surface catching the sun like a drop of liquid fire. One leans forward, holding the mirror steady, while the other traces a line of dark kohl around her eyes. "Hold still," the first warns. "If you blink, you'll look like a scribe's mistake." The second bursts into laughter anyway, and the mirror wobbles. The mirror, itself a rare and precious object, isn't flat. It's curved, slightly rippled, so her reflection seems to smile back at her from another world. Beside it lies a tray of small alabaster jars and reed brushes, their tips stained with pigment and powder. Among them sits a tiny, unassuming cup of gray paste. "For the teeth," says one of the attendants, seeing your curiosity. The lady never begins a day without it. You lean closer. The paste smells faintly of salt and dried iris. She scoops a dab with a slender stick, places it on her tongue, and brushes gently with a tuft of palm fiber bound in linen. Each stroke is delicate, practiced. When she finishes, she rinses her mouth with scented water and smiles at the mirror, teeth gleaming faintly. "A woman should never let the gods see her unprepared," she says lightly. Historians believe noble women like her were among the first to combine hygiene and beauty as one ritual. They brushed not just for health, but for presentation, to smell of mint, to taste of sweetness, to speak as gracefully as they looked. In ancient letters between high-born women, scholars have found small references to mouth scent, Or the bloom of iris at dawn, coded compliments for personal care. The attendant refills the water bowl and hums softly while wiping the utensils clean. Every surface must shine, she murmurs. Mirror, mouth, soul, it is all the same. You notice how her movements mirror the priestly ablutions you saw earlier. Cleanliness here is more than aesthetic. It's moral geometry. Symmetry applied to the body. The lady gestures for her maid to bring perfume. And as the room fills with the scent of lotus, she leans toward her companion. "Did you hear of the merchant's wife?" she asks. She met the vizier's daughter yesterday and smiled before rinsing. Poor man nearly fainted. They both laugh. Gossip, it seems, hasn't changed in 5,000 years. A servant boy enters carrying trays of fruit and bread. The lady takes a fig and tears it delicately. "Always rinse after sweetness," she tells the maid, "or the bees will visit your pillow." It's half superstition, half common sense. Myrrh, mint, honey, and salt. Her world runs on balance. Outside, you catch glimpses of other homes through half-open doors. Courtyards lined with potted palms. Walls painted with lilies and hunting scenes. Each house hums with quiet rituals. Women grinding powders. Men washing hands before meals. Servants polishing copper mirrors until they glow. Every motion carries a touch of reverence, as though reflection itself were a form of prayer. One of the attendants offers you a small bronze mirror to examine. The surface is cool and slightly warped. When you peer into it, your face ripples softly. "The reflection lies a little," she says. "But it flatters." You grin. Some truths never age. She points to a shelf lined with jars, each labeled with hieroglyphs. For the mouth, for the eyes, for the hair. One jar bears a faded bee symbol. Honey paste, you guess. Another shows a small flower, iris again, for scent and preservation. The lady's beauty, you realize, is a mosaic of small, daily acts, each one rooted in materials drawn from earth, river, and sun. Historians still argue how much of Egyptian vanity was practical versus spiritual. Was it about attracting the divine gaze or simply one's neighbors? The answer, as always, may be both. To the Egyptian, beauty was proof of harmony. A clean mouth didn't just make conversation pleasant, it declared balance with the world. The lady finishes her morning ritual, gestures to her attendant, and rises gracefully. She slips on a wide gold collar that gleams like the sun. "Come," she says, "let's walk before the air grows jealous." As she steps into the street, she carries herself like a small pyramid, self-contained, shining, eternal. You follow her gaze toward a passing servant carrying bundles of herbs. "Myrrh for the house of the dead," he calls. The lady pauses, expression softening. "For them too," she murmurs. "We all need our perfumes." That evening you return to the same courtyard. The servants are cleaning up after dinner. The mirror rests against the wall, catching the fading light. The lady sits alone now, brushing her teeth once more before bed. The world outside hums with frogs and the whisper of the river. She brushes slowly, eyes half closed, lost in thought. It strikes you that this moment, small, private, unrecorded, is the truest kind of history. Not the wars, not the kings, but the woman before her mirror, making sure her breath smells of mint and not mortality. You watch as she dips her reed in water one last time, spits gently into a clay bowl, and smiles faintly at her reflection. The mirror, though warped, gives back a perfect answer. Then she blows out the lamp, leaving the faint scent of iris hanging in the air like a memory that refuses to fade. The streets of the noble quarter fade behind you, giving way to the smell of clay and smoke. You follow a narrow path until it opens into a quiet workshop where metal gleams faintly in the dim light. Inside, a craftsman bends over a small table, his hand steady as he polishes something that looks suspiciously sharp. You step closer and realize it's a set of dental tools. Bronze glints under his lamp. Thin hooks, small chisels, hollow tubes, and even what looks like tiny forceps. You shiver slightly. They resemble torture instruments more than tools of healing. The craftsman looks up, smiling at your hesitation. "You have a fearful face," he says with a chuckle. They all do. He wipes his hands on a cloth and gestures for you to come closer. "Don't worry," he adds. "They hurt less when the patient believes." On his table lies a collection of instruments wrapped in linen. Some are delicate, like jewelry maker's picks. Others are brutal, thick rods ending in curved ends. This one, he says, holding up a narrow chisel for scraping rot. This one, a small hammer, for freeing pain from the jaw. You try not to imagine the process. Historians have found similar tools buried in tombs: bronze needles, dental pliers, and even fine drills. Evidence suggests these early dentists, or tooth healers as inscriptions called them, could clean cavities, drain abscesses, and occasionally remove bad teeth entirely. The idea of anesthesia was centuries away. Courage was the only numbing agent. He opens a small wooden box, revealing thin cords of woven flax. "For tying," he explains. "When a tooth shakes but will not fall, we bind it to its neighbor." You peer closer. It's the earliest form of dental splinting. Rudimentary orthodontics born out of necessity. "Do you make these for the physicians?" you ask. He nods. "Mostly for the priests," he says. "They like their tools polished. When a man of the gods pulls your tooth, it must gleam." He laughs, but you sense pride beneath it. These instruments, harsh as they seem, are emblems of precision. Nearby, his apprentice grinds salt and copper oxide into powder. "For cleansing," he murmurs. Bronze kills rot. He sprinkles the mixture onto a small reed brush, demonstrating how it scours the metal clean. You realize it's the same mixture used in toothpaste, salt and mineral, sacred and abrasive. Sometimes, the craftsman says, the priests bring me broken tools and tell me the gods snapped them. He shrugs. The gods are rough with their instruments. Then, lowering his voice, he adds, "But most times it is the patient who snaps first." You wince at the thought. A procedure without anesthesia. A tooth pulled or scraped while chants fill the air. Yet there's something oddly noble in it. Pain in this world was a conversation with the divine. To endure was to be seen. He hands you a small bronze pick. It's light, perfectly balanced. "Made for precision," he says proudly. "If your hand trembles, you cut the lip instead. You hand it back carefully. And if it bleeds, you ask? Then you rinse with salt and pray it was the right tooth." He replies with a wink. The apprentice, a quiet boy with wide eyes, holds up a half-finished pair of tongs. "My first," he says. The craftsman nods approvingly. Every healer must start by making his own pain. You ask what he means, and he replies, "A man should feel the weight of what he uses to hurt." The workshop smells of metal, ash and mint oil, a curious mix of labor and cleansing. In one corner, a small brazier burns steadily, heating bronze until it glows red. The craftsman dips tools into it, then cools them in water. Steam rises in shimmering waves. "We burn the sickness away," he says. "Metal forgets nothing unless you make it forget." Historians still argue whether these tools were widely used or ceremonial. Some think they were offerings, symbols of healing rather than instruments of it. But the craftsman's calloused fingers suggest otherwise. The nicks on his skin, the dark smudges of ash, all evidence of a man who works, not performs. He gestures to a small papyrus pinned to the wall. It shows a crude drawing of a head, mouth open, with hieroglyphs marking pain, cure, and silence. "The 3 stages," he explains. "Pain calls you, cure tests you, silence thanks you." It's his philosophy in miniature. Each tool, each scream, a step toward peace. As the sun begins to fade, the craftsman cleans his hands with natron water, then dips a twig into mint paste and brushes his teeth. "A healer must show proof," he says, grinning. You notice his teeth, yellowed, worn, but surprisingly whole. "The gods left me mine," he says proudly. "They know I respect their work." You thank him for his time, and he nods, returning to his bench. "If you ever need one pulled," he calls after you, "bring honey for my apprentice and courage for yourself." Outside, the air cools quickly, carrying the faint ring of hammers from other workshops. You pause, glancing back through the open doorway. The glow of the forge paints the craftsman and his apprentice in amber light, 2 silhouettes working quietly, preserving an art as delicate as it is painful. You can't help but think, behind every gleaming smile in those tomb paintings, there must have been someone like him, patient, precise, unthanked. The invisible hands that shaped comfort out of suffering, beauty out of blood. And as you walk away into the deepening dusk, the rhythmic sound of metal on stone fades behind you, like a heartbeat slowing after long effort. The tools of pain gleam softly in your mind's eye, no longer frightening, but strangely reassuring, a reminder that care has always been a craft, and every instrument of hurt was once made in the service of healing. The night returns soft and windless, and the Nile glows like poured glass under a half moon. You find yourself following the riverbank again, where the air smells faintly of clay and crushed mint. A low chant rises from somewhere ahead, steady, repetitive, almost hypnotic. When you draw closer, you realize it's coming from a small hut lit by oil lamps. Inside, a woman sits on a woven mat, her face lined but kind, her eyes steady with the calm of someone who has seen pain and outlasted it. Around her, a few villagers wait, each cradling a swollen cheek or pressing fingers to their jaws. You recognize this place instantly. It's a dentist's hut, or at least as close as ancient Egypt came to one. The woman looks up, smiling faintly. "Come in," she says, gesturing to a stool. You don't look in pain, but you listen like someone who's seen it. You sit. Her name, she tells you, is Nebet-Hotep, meaning Lady of Peace. Though my patients, she adds dryly, would not agree. The hut is filled with scents, honey, beer, resin, and smoke. She moves between the waiting patients with practiced ease. A young man clutches his jaw, grimacing. "Tooth of the lower gate," she mutters, feeling along his cheek. Loose, but not free. She mixes a paste of barley flour, salt, and crushed onions, adds a drop of palm wine, and applies it gently to his gums. "The salt pulls the heat," she says. "The onion chases the worms." You blink. The toothworm again. It was a belief that lasted thousands of years, that decay came from a tiny creature burrowing inside the tooth. Nebet-Hotep knows better than to question the myth. What matters is that her treatment works. Garlic, salt, honey, all antibacterial, all potent in their own quiet way. She turns to an older woman next. The woman's jaw is swollen, her eyes red from exhaustion. Nebet-Hotep hums softly as she warms a cloth dipped in mint water, presses it to the woman's cheek, and begins a slow chant. Pain leaves with the night wind, not with the dawn. It's both spell and comfort, the oldest kind of placebo, compassion sung into function. Historians still argue whether these healers were official practitioners or folk doctors working outside temple authority. The medical papyri mention women healers occasionally, but names are rare. Yet here she is, methodical, gentle, commanding. She works not with power, but with presence. When the chant ends, the woman exhales shakily. "Better?" Nebet-Hotep asks. The woman nods. The god inside has grown quiet. Nebet-Hotep smiles. "Then he is sleeping. Don't wake him with sweets." You suppress a laugh. Even in antiquity, the prescription for health came with a touch of humor. As the patients leave, Nebet-Hotep sits beside you, stretching her hands. "The mouth," she says softly, "is where the heart hides. That is why pain here feels like betrayal." You glance at her, intrigued. "And you fight betrayal with herbs?" She smiles faintly. "No, with patience. Herbs are only the excuse." You ask her how she learned her craft. "My mother," she says, "and hers before her. The temple taught the priests, but women learned by touch. When the men's gods failed, people came to us." She dips her fingers into a small bowl of oil and massages her wrists, the light catching tiny scars on her skin. Burns from boiling resins, cuts from broken reeds. "We bleed so others don't," she says simply. She shows you her tools, a small copper spoon for mixing, a hollow reed for applying paste, and a curved shell used to scoop out pus from abscesses. You try not to flinch. "Do they scream?" You ask quietly. She nods. "Always. But they thank me when it's done." Outside, the wind stirs, carrying the smell of the river. Nebet-Hotep stands and begins to tidy her workspace. "Some nights," she says, "the pain comes not from teeth but from words. A husband's anger, a son's lie. Still, I give them honey. It helps either way." Her philosophy lingers with you. Healing for her is less about curing than about listening. When she works, she hums. A sound that seems to fill the whole hut, steady and low, as though time itself slows down to match her rhythm. A new patient enters, a boy of 12, clutching his cheek. "It hurts," he says softly. Nebet-Hotep kneels, inspects his mouth with care. "You've chewed too many dates," she says, smiling. He looks embarrassed. She mixes honey and pepper into a paste, applies it gently. "It will sting," she warns. He flinches as it touches his gum, but she strokes his hair, whispering, "Good. The sting means it's chasing the pain away." She hands him a small twig of palm. "Chew this each morning," she says. "When it tastes bitter, you're done." The boy nods solemnly, as if receiving sacred wisdom. After he leaves, you ask if she ever gets tired. Nebuchadnezzar chuckles. Of the screams? Never. They remind me we're alive. Silence is the only illness that cannot be cured. The oil lamps burn lower. Shadows pool in the corners of the hut. She opens a small jar and hands it to you. Inside is a smooth brown paste that smells of cinnamon and resin. For the mouth, she says, but also for courage. You taste a little. It burns, then cools. It wakes you, she says. Sometimes we need to feel pain before we stop fearing it. Historians might call her a primitive healer, but as you watch her clean her tools, you see the truth? She's part scientist, part priestess, part mother. Her hut isn't just a clinic, it's a confessional. A sanctuary for the most vulnerable part of the body and the soul. As you step outside, she calls softly after you. Keep your words as clean as your teeth. The night swallows her voice, but you carry the sound with you as you walk along the river. The air feels lighter somehow, the stars sharper. Somewhere behind you, Nebuchadnezzar hums her slow tune again, a melody older than medicine itself. You find yourself smiling in the dark, teeth catching the moonlight, and think, perhaps healing has always been this simple. A steady hand, a listening ear, and something that burns just enough to remind you you're still here. Dawn comes in slow layers of rose and gold. The air smells faintly of damp clay and fire, the kind of scent that lingers after incense burns out. You're walking again along the quieter streets near the temple district when you hear the low hum of chanting. At first you assume it's the morning prayers, but as you draw closer you realize this isn't worship. It's argument. Inside a shaded courtyard, 3 men stand around a table of scrolls and herbs. One wears the white linen robes of a priest, the second a healer's apron, and the third a scribe's modest wrap. The table between them is covered in bowls, salt, honey, myrrh, iris, garlic, and curiously, a small clay jaw model, complete with painted teeth. You rely too much on words, the priest says sharply, pointing at the healer. Pain leaves through prayer, not potions. The healer snorts, crushing garlic with his palm. Then pray your toothache away next time it visits you, Holy One. The scribe coughs politely, trying to keep the peace. Perhaps, he suggests, the gods gave us herbs and hymns. You linger by the wall unnoticed, watching the first recorded dental debate in history unfold. The priest lifts a scroll, the Book of Healing through Ra, and reads aloud. The breath of the gods purifies the flesh. His words cleanse the bones. He looks smug. The healer waves a pestle in reply. Ra's breath tastes of garlic today, he mutters, mixing another paste. Because the man who came to me last night could not even sleep to pray. Historians still argue whether such clashes truly existed or were exaggerated by later scribes, but it's easy to imagine. Religion and medicine were siblings with constant rivalry in Egypt. Priests saw ailments as moral imbalance. Healers saw them as physical chaos. Both wanted the same thing, order, but spoke different dialects of truth. The scribe scribbles notes furiously, amused. And what of the women? He asks lightly. They heal both ways. They chant and chew herbs. The healer laughs, because they listen to pain before they name it. The priest frowns but says nothing. Even the gods, perhaps, cannot argue with that. The debate turns playful as the healer begins mixing a new formula. Let us see which method Ra prefers, he declares. He combines natron, iris, and a drop of honey, forming a pale paste. You pray, I brush. The priest folds his arms, unimpressed. He hands the priest a twig dipped in the mixture. Try it, he dares. If the gods disapprove, they'll strike me down. The priest hesitates, then, perhaps for pride's sake, obeys. He rubs the paste along his gums, grimaces at the sting, and then unexpectedly laughs. It burns like divine wrath. Which means it works, the healer replies smoothly. Even you can't help but smile. The scribe records everything, murmuring. Note, cleansing achieved through shared pain and laughter. You suspect he's writing more philosophy than medicine, but that's fine. In this courtyard, discovery happens not through solemnity, but curiosity, and a bit of mockery. The priest finally concedes. Perhaps Ra guides your hands as he guides my tongue, he says grudgingly. The healer bows slightly, and perhaps Ra's tongue aches from too many sermons. Even the scribe bursts out laughing now. They sit together to eat dates, bread, and a jug of beer. You notice that after chewing, each man instinctively rinses his mouth before speaking again. Whatever their philosophies, habits unite them. The scribe points this out.
You see?
We clean our mouths to honor both flesh and word. The healer nods. Then perhaps, he says, magic and medicine share one root, the will to stop suffering. Historians still discuss this fusion. Egyptian medicine was never fully secular. Every ingredient came with a verse, every cure with a blessing. It wasn't superstition, it was strategy. Faith calmed fear, and fear was half the illness. As they finish eating, the priest opens another scroll, this one bearing hymns to Sekhmet, goddess of both plague and healing. When she smiles, he says, the herbs bloom stronger. The healer grins. Then may she smile more often, and less when I forget an ingredient. The scribe rises, collecting his notes. I will call this scroll the harmony of the mouth, he declares. Because what leaves the mouth, prayer or medicine, must both taste clean. The priest and healer exchange amused glances. The rivalry dissolves into mutual respect. You step back into the sunlight, leaving them to their laughter. It's strange how something as simple as toothpaste has become the meeting ground for philosophy, theology, and chemistry. But then again, the mouth is the bridge between body and spirit. It eats, speaks, prays, and curses, all through the same opening. Of course it would breed debate. You walk toward the river, passing other healers selling powders and oils. One hawks the priest's breath, a mint salve. Another offers Ra's smile, honey and salt blend. Marketing, it seems, was born alongside faith. A group of children chase each other nearby, chanting nonsense rhymes about toothworms and crocodile gods. If your breath smells bad, one sings, the gods turn their heads. They collapse into laughter. You smile too. Education by song, the oldest form of transmission. As the day warms, you pause by a well to drink. The water's coolness on your tongue feels sharper now that you've watched people argue about what it means to cleanse. You realize that between chants and chemicals, they all sought the same peace, a small victory over the body's frailty. A passing old man notices your thoughtful look. You wonder which is true. He asks. You nod. He smiles, showing teeth surprisingly intact for his age. The gods made herbs, child. Perhaps that was their first prayer. You laugh softly, grateful for the simplicity of it. The argument, the recipes, the faith, all different routes to the same truth. Every mouth, in its own way, seeks silence after pain. And as you walk along the sunlit path, the priest's laughter still faint behind you. You think maybe healing doesn't begin in temples or huts, but right here, in the shared breath between those who disagree and still choose to laugh together. The sun has climbed halfway up the sky, washing the temple walls in a pale golden light. You follow a path paved with smooth limestone slabs until you reach a long shaded portico where a young scribe sits cross-legged, surrounded by scrolls. His reed pen flicks steadily, his movements neat and practiced. You recognize the symbol painted above the doorway, the staff of life, flanked by two eyes of Horus. This is no ordinary archive. It's the house of the Papyrus Ebers, the most ancient collection of medical wisdom known to humankind. The scribe glances up as you approach. You're late, he says teasingly. The toothache of the gods waits for no one. He motions for you to sit beside him. Before him lies a long sheet of papyrus, its fibers yellowed and fragile, covered in rows of tight black ink. He smooths a wrinkle and whispers, "These are the secrets of the mouth." The priests call them the words of healing and preservation. You lean in, reading carefully. The hieroglyphs are small and dense. Some you recognize, the familiar. Signs for honey, myrrh, natron, and the unmistakable loop that means mouth. Beside the symbols are tiny drawings of tools, a spoon, a pestle, a thin stick shaped like a brush. The scribe begins to read aloud. To prevent the teeth from moving and the gums from festering, pound malachite and honey, place upon the mouth. His voice is calm, almost rhythmic. To drive away pain of the jaw, rub onion and salt with beer. Repeat until the spirit departs. He chuckles softly. They always say the spirit departs. I think they mean the ache. You smile. It's strange. The language is ceremonial, but the instructions are practical, almost clinical. Each recipe combines ingredients both sacred and sensible. Honey for infection, salt for cleansing, beer as disinfectant and courage. Even the phrase "the spirit departs" is poetic shorthand for relief. Historians still debate whether these scrolls were the work of one master physician or many hands compiling temple lore. But either way, they are astonishing. The closest thing humanity had to a medical encyclopedia 3,500 years ago. The Papyrus Ebers doesn't separate toothache from headache, faith from fact. Everything belongs in the same continuum of care. The scribe flips to another passage. Here, if a man's mouth be hot and red, and he eats no food, then say, there is fire within. Cool it with mint and lotus, and his heart will rejoice. You close your eyes and can almost taste the mixture, bitter lotus, cooling mint, and that faint sweetness of honey. He lowers his voice. Some lines were written by priests, others by travelers. This one, they say, came from the south. He points to a passage written in slightly different script. Grind the seed of the moringa tree, mix with oil, and rub upon the teeth. It will bring peace between bone and flesh. He grins. Peace between bone and flesh. Now that's a promise worth remembering. You ask how these scrolls are preserved. He gestures to clay jars lined up along the wall. We coat them in resin, like mummies. The knowledge must survive as the body does. He hesitates, then adds, sometimes I wonder if the gods ever read them. They seem too perfect to need remedies. A faint breeze stirs the papyrus, and for a moment you can almost hear whispers, as though the scroll itself breathes. The scribe steadies it with gentle hands. Careful, he says. This one speaks easily, but dies easily too. On a nearby shelf rests a collection of small clay tablets, each engraved with recipes for pastes of purification. You pick one up. The inscription reads, mix powdered pumice with vinegar and honey. Rub gently until white returns. You can't help laughing quietly. The first recorded toothpaste commercial slogan, until white returns. The scribe hears you and smiles. People like miracles, he says, even when they must make them themselves. He gestures toward the far end of the hall, where two older priests work together, their heads bowed over a long piece of papyrus stretched on the floor. They copy, line by line, so no cure is lost, he says. You watch as one dips his pen and traces the word for mouth over and over again, dozens of times down the page, like a chant made visible. In a pause, the scribe grows thoughtful. Do you think it's strange, he asks, that we write so much about pain? You shake your head. Maybe pain keeps us honest. He nods slowly. Yes, pain and ink are both stubborn. They last. He hands you a small scrap torn from an unused sheet. Here, he says, write what you've learned. You hesitate. I'm no scribe. Everyone writes, he insists, whether they know the symbols or not. So you take the reed pen, dip it lightly in ink, and draw the simplest sign you can remember, the open oval that means mouth. The scribe studies it, nodding in approval. Good, he says. Now the gods know you listened. Historians sometimes joke that Egyptian medicine was half poetry, half prescription. But sitting here, you see how inseparable the two truly were. They believed that words could carry power, that to write a cure was to make it live. As you stand to leave, the scribe rolls up his papyrus with care, ties it with string, and places it in a jar labeled Tooth of the Sufferer. There will always be another one, he says simply. Outside, sunlight floods the courtyard. You look, back once at the cool shadows within, where ink dries slowly on papyrus that will outlast kingdoms. Somewhere in those lines, a recipe for peace between bone and flesh waits to be read again. And you think, as you step into the light, that maybe every generation writes its own papyrus Ebers, a record of how it tried, however clumsily, to make pain yield to patience and ritual. The noon sun burns bright enough to bleach the world. Heat presses down like a living thing, and the city hums with movement. Merchants shouting, donkeys braying, the Nile glittering like a blade. You follow a caravan winding its way through the southern gate, where the air smells faintly of resin and salt. The traders here are unloading jars marked with curious symbols. A sprig, a drop, a wave. Frankincense from Punt, one of them boasts. Salt from the Red Sea, myrrh from the east. You've reached the market of imported wonders. the arteries that fed Egyptian hygiene and medicine. Every jar holds a story and every grain a journey. A merchant waves you over, his face shiny with sweat and pride. Look, traveler, true frankincense, the breath of the gods. Burn it, chew it, wash with it. Even Ra would envy your scent. He pops a small bead of it into his mouth, chews thoughtfully, then grins. For the breath, he explains, and for the profit. Frankincense and myrrh were Egypt's most treasured imports, brought by boat across the Red Sea from Punt, a region historians place somewhere along modern Somalia or Eritrea. The voyage took weeks, the profits immense. Myrrh preserved bodies. Frankincense cleansed them. Both found their way into temple smoke, mummification, and toothpaste alike. Nearby, another trader is measuring out crystalline chunks of salt, coarse, pale, sharp as glass. Red Sea salt, he says proudly. Cleans wounds, cleans teeth, cleans sin, he laughs. His helper grinds a handful in a bronze mortar, mixing it with natron to form a gritty powder. The smell is clean and biting. Historians still argue how organized this trade truly was, whether controlled by the state or by merchants under temple license. But every shard of evidence agrees on one point. Egypt's obsession with cleanliness made these goods worth their weight in gold. You watch as a young woman purchases a small pouch of salt and myrrh, tying it carefully to her belt. For my husband's breath, she says with mock solemnity. If the gods will not bless him, at least I can make him tolerable. Everyone around her laughs. In one corner, a physician haggles for a batch of dried herbs, imported mint, cinnamon bark, and something labeled flowers of Syria. He unwraps one and lets you smell it. The aroma is sharp, cool, and strangely familiar. Peppermint's ancient ancestor. Good for the gums, he says, and for the spirit. The mouth is the doorway of the heart. He catches your eye and smiles. You can quote me on that. Behind him, workers unload amphorae of oil. From Byblos, they shout, olive and sesame, smooth as the river's skin. The oil traders know their clients well. Oil-soothed gums, softened twigs for brushing, and flavored pastes. It was also luxury, a mark of someone who could afford not to taste only dust. You pass a stall where a scribe sits writing price lists for temple records. He murmurs as he writes, salt, 3 Theban per jar, myrrh 7, frankincense 8, iris root 5. He pauses, adds a note. Increased demand before festival of purity. You realize what that means. Every religious holiday the city brushed its teeth. Cleanliness was a civic event. A small crowd gathers to watch a traveling apothecary demonstrate his miracle cleansing paste. He mixes powdered myrrh, crushed pumice, and salt water, chanting as he stirs. For the foul breath, for the bleeding gum, for the sorrow of the mouth. He declares dramatically. He smears a bit on his own teeth, winces at the sting, then beams. See, pain means purity. The crowd cheers. Marketing, ancient style. One child tugs at your sleeve, holding up a string of dried mint leaves. For luck, he says solemnly. Chew one before you speak to a god. You give him a copper coin and take the charm. It smells bright and alive, cutting through the heavy air. Later, you wander toward the harbor, where ships unload in slow rhythm. Sailors hum as they carry crates stamped with the symbol of Hathor, goddess of beauty. The air is thick with incense smoke and the cries of seabirds. You stop at a crate marked with hieroglyphs meaning for the temples of clean breath. Inside are bundles of myrrh wrapped in palm leaves. You imagine them traveling hundreds of miles over shifting seas, all so that some priest or merchant could wake tomorrow and brush his teeth with the scent of the divine. A sailor nearby dips his hand into a jar of salt, tosses a pinch into his mouth and grins. Keeps the rot away, he says, showing off his worn teeth, and gives the fish something to envy. You laugh. The man nods toward the crates. All this for a smile, he says. The gods must love mouths more than prayers. Historians have found temple inscriptions listing the same goods, imported salt, resins, herbs, all labeled as offerings for purification. In Egypt, commerce and faith weren't separate economies. They were one continuous trade between gods and mortals, profit and piety. You sit on a crate, watching the boats bob gently in the water. The sails ripple like pale wings. Workers chant as they unload. Frankincense for Ra, myrrh for Isis, salt for the living, oil for the dead, each line punctuated by laughter and the splash of waves. It's easy to romanticize this world, But the truth is, it ran on sweat and exchange, on people who carried scent and salt across deserts, so someone far away could start their morning feeling clean. As the sun dips lower, the smell of resin thickens. You take one last look at the harbor, the jars, the ropes, the faces gleaming with salt and satisfaction, and realize this: even the smallest act of brushing your teeth in ancient Egypt was part of a global story. The mouth that tasted myrrh in Thebes was connected by trade winds to Punt, Byblos, and beyond. You close your eyes, breathing in the sweet sting of myrrh carried by the sea breeze, and think how strange and beautiful it is that history can taste like salt, smell like mint, and sound like laughter under the burning sun. By late afternoon, the city exhales. The clamor of trade fades into the hum of daily chores. The scrape of sandals on stone, the thump of pestles, the rhythm of water carried home from wells. You follow the smell of warm bread and roasted onions into a quieter quarter near the potter's kilns. This is where ordinary life happens, where no priests or scribes write scrolls about mouthwash, but where people actually use it. A woman sits by her doorway, grinding something in a stone bowl. Her daughter, maybe 8 years old, helps by fanning the flies away. You greet them and ask what they're making. She smiles, revealing a mouth stained with the faint golden tint of herbs. "Cleaning paste," she says proudly. "For my husband. He chews too much beer bread." She holds up the bowl for you. To see, a mixture of powdered salt, mint leaves, crushed pumice, and a little honey. It smells sharp and pleasant. She dips a thin reed into it, wraps the end with a strip of flax, and begins brushing her teeth in gentle circles. You notice her motions are steady, practiced. This is not improvisation, it's habit. "Does everyone here make their own?" you ask. She shrugs. "Some buy from the temple stalls, but I trust my hands more than their prices." She laughs softly, offering you a small taste on a clean reed. You hesitate, then try. It's gritty, salty, a little too sweet. Not terrible. Better than some modern herbal toothpaste you've tried. Her daughter giggles. "He made a face," she says. "That means it's working," the mother replies. "Pain means purity." You both laugh. Apparently, that marketing line from the apothecary at the docks traveled fast. Historians still argue how widely oral hygiene habits spread beyond the elite. But archaeological evidence, small toothsticks, worn pestles, traces of salt and myrrh, suggests ordinary Egyptians cared about their smiles as much as their pharaohs did. Cleanliness wasn't luxury, it was dignity. You sit beside the doorway, watching people pass. One man walks by with a bundle of miswak sticks, fibrous twigs still sold today across North Africa and the Middle East. He splits one end with his knife, chews it to soften the fibers, then begins brushing. The woman waves. "That's better than what I make," she admits, "but only if the tree's from the right place." The man pauses, overhearing. "Always the right place," he says. "Wadi Hammamat. If it's good enough for the gods, it's good enough for me." He winks and continues on his way. You ask the woman where she learned her recipe. "From my mother," she says simply, "and she from hers. The temple sells scrolls, but mothers teach better." She wipes her hands on her linen skirt and adds, "My grandmother used to say the gods don't enter a dirty mouth." Her daughter, curious, asks, "Even if I sing to them?" The mother smiles. "Especially then." As the heat fades, neighbors begin to gather in the street, talking about their day. One man mentions that the baker down the road broke a tooth on a stone in his flour. Another jokes that maybe he should pray to the god of grinders. Everyone laughs, but one old woman mutters, "He should have used sesame oil last week." It's a community woven from superstition and sense, where every cure is both memory and ritual. You help the woman fetch water from a nearby well. The bucket creaks as it rises, dripping cold droplets onto the stone rim. She adds a pinch of natron to it and swirls the water. "Mouth rinse," she explains. "Before bed, after dinner. We don't want to greet sleep with a dirty tongue. That line stays with you. Don't greet sleep with a dirty tongue." It sounds half poetic, half scientific, the perfect motto for Egyptian hygiene. The woman's husband returns as the sky turns orange. He's tall, broad-shouldered, with the weariness of a man who's hauled amphorae all day. He greets his wife with a kiss, then obediently takes the bowl she offers. "Open," she says. He sighs but complies, brushing as the neighbors cheer. "See," she calls out, "even men can shine like gods." He spits into the sand and declares, "If Ra himself used this, I'll worship your pestle from now on." The street erupts in laughter again. Historians often focus on the temples and scrolls, but the heartbeat of Egyptian cleanliness lived here, in small homes, shared laughter, and nightly rituals. The elites might have written recipes, but the people kept them alive. You notice how the sunset colors the walls red gold, the same shade as myrrh resin. Children chase each other, singing nonsense rhymes about clean teeth and crocodile gods. A young man starts a tune on a reed flute, its notes lazy and low. The entire street seems to exhale in rhythm. One neighbor offers a bowl of barley beer. "For the throat," he says, "and to rinse what the gods won't." You take a sip, sweet, slightly sour, soothing. Maybe that's why the Egyptians lived long enough to invent toothpaste. They knew how to end their day gently. The woman wipes the bowl clean and sets it on a shelf. "Tomorrow," she says, "I'll grind fresh mint." The smell fades after the second sunrise. You nod, thanking her. She waves you off. "No thanks needed," she says. "Clean teeth make better smiles, and smiles make better evenings." You walk away slowly, the cool breeze carrying hints of mint, oil, and baked bread. In the fading light, you glimpse other doorways, each with its own mortar, its own rhythm of grinding and laughter. No one calls it science. No one calls it ritual. It's simply life. You realize that history doesn't live only in scrolls. It lives in the everyday gestures, the way a mother teaches her child to brush, the way neighbors joke about purity and pride, the way mint becomes both medicine and comfort. And as twilight settles, you think that maybe every civilization's greatness begins with small acts of care, and that the Egyptians, with their jars of honey and salt, knew this truth by heart. Night slips quietly over the city, and the moon hangs like a shard of alabaster above the Nile. The air cools, carrying a faint sweetness from the riverbanks. Lotus blossoms, papyrus reeds, and the lingering smoke of kitchen fires. You wander through the silent courtyards until you reach the steps of a small temple lit by flickering oil lamps. This is the shrine of Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of both destruction and healing. At first it seems empty. Then you notice two figures kneeling before the altar, a young priestess and an older healer, their heads bent close together. Between them sits a low table covered with bowls, bronze tools, and rolls of linen. You approach quietly, and the healer gestures for you to sit. "We're preparing offerings," he says softly, "for the mouths of the gods." The priestess unwraps a small jar and dips her finger into a thick amber paste. "Honey and myrrh," she explains, "for sweetness in speech and purity in prayer." She presses a dab of it onto the mouth of a small stone statue, Sekhmet's image, and then wipes her hands on a cloth. "Even gods," she adds, "must taste renewal. It feels like you're intruding on a secret ritual," but the healer smiles. "You've seen how people clean their mouths," he says. "Now see how we clean the gods." He places a second bowl before the statue, a mixture of natron, salt, and crushed lotus petals. "This is for silence," he says, "to wash away the unspoken." Historians still debate whether these rituals were symbolic or practical, but the parallels to daily hygiene are impossible to miss. The same ingredients used for toothpaste, salt, honey, myrrh, also appeared in temple rites. The act of cleansing one's mouth was both spiritual and medical, part of a cosmic hygiene that bound humans and gods alike. The priestess begins to chant softly, her voice slow and rhythmic. "Cleanse the mouth, purify the word. Let the tongue speak truth and the breath carry peace." The melody echoes against the stone walls, low and soothing. You realize the entire ceremony could lull someone to sleep, if not for the sharp scent of myrrh hanging in the air like warm resin. She glances at you with a small smile. "Every word we say travels through the mouth," she murmurs. "That's why it must be clean, not just in body, but in intent." You watch as she takes a long reed, dips it in the honey mixture, and traces a circle on the altar. The ancients believed decay began when truth was neglected, she continues. Rotten teeth, rotten lies, both fester from within. The healer nods. And that, he says, is why we healers and priests argue so much. We both try to keep the world from rotting. He opens another jar, this one filled with powdered malachite, its deep green glinting in the lamplight. For color and protection, he says. Crushed stone to guard the flesh. He mixes it with oil and applies a small stroke along his own gums, grimacing slightly. Tastes like sand and metal, but the gods never promised comfort. You can't help but laugh quietly. You people make pain sound like worship. He shrugs. Maybe it is. We give thanks for endurance. Outside, a night wind rustles the papyrus curtains, carrying the distant sounds of water against the banks. The priestess closes her eyes and whispers another verse. This time, a prayer for those suffering from the worms of the tooth. She dips her fingers into a bowl of beer and sprinkles droplets across the altar. Beer, she says, smiling. To make the gods laugh. They forget pain easier that way. You think back to the merchant's wife and her homemade paste, to the laughing priests and the scribe at the temple. It strikes you how humor and holiness coexist here. Even pain gets a sense of irony. Historians still wonder whether Egyptians truly believed in toothworms, those mythical little creatures that supposedly burrowed into gums and caused decay. Some papyri mention them explicitly, others ignore them entirely. But whether literal or metaphorical, the image makes sense. Decay is invisible until it hurts. Naming it gives people power. The healer lights a small lump of frankincense and lets the smoke curl upward. The scent is hypnotic, sharp, then sweet, then faintly bitter. You watch it drift through the lamplight, forming strange shapes. Smoke, he says, is the god's breath returning to us. He dips a twig into the glowing ash and draws 3 dots on your wrist. For balance, he says simply. Every mouth, every word, every act, balance between the seen and unseen. The priestess adds softly, cleanse too much and you erase what makes you human. Cleanse too little and rot begins. They fall silent for a while, letting the incense burn itself out. You sit with them in the half-dark, the room glowing gold and green. Somewhere in the temple a cat meows, appropriate, you think, for Sekhmet's feline kin. The priestess chuckles. That one believes itself divine, she says. Perhaps it is. She hands you a small clay charm shaped like a lion's tooth. Keep this, she says. It will remind you that every pain has a protector. You take it gently, feeling the rough edges under your fingers. The healer yawns. The work of the mouth is never done, he murmurs. We eat, we pray, we speak, and we decay, in that order. You smile at the bleak poetry of it. And we brush, you add. He laughs softly. Yes, the gods too. As you leave the temple, the night air feels cleaner somehow, touched with the scent of myrrh and fire. You look back once more. The flickering lamps, the slow movements of the priestess wiping her tools, the way the smoke rises like a whisper toward the ceiling. Maybe every ritual, every recipe, every act of hygiene was never just about health. It was about rhythm, balance, and care. The same qualities that make music or love last. And walking back through the quiet streets, your steps echo against stone polished by centuries of prayers and laughter. You feel a strange peace settle over you, as if even the ancient gods, somewhere, are brushing their teeth and smiling in approval. You wander away from Sekhmet's temple, following the faint hum of the night markets reopening for the evening crowd. The air has cooled, and the stone streets carry a silver sheen under the moonlight. Lanterns swing gently in doorways, and merchants light small fires to ward off mosquitoes. The scent of smoke, cumin, and something faintly floral hangs heavy. Ahead, a small workshop glows like a hearth. The flickering light of oil lamps dancing off clay jars and bronze tools. You peek inside and find a craftsman sitting cross-legged, turning a lump of wet clay between his hands. His hair is streaked with gray, his fingers sure and steady. On the wall behind him, dozens of finished jars glint in neat rows, each labeled with painted hieroglyphs: myrrh, salt of the sea, honey of the north. He glances up at you. You look like someone who appreciates a good container, he says, his voice soft but amused. Come in, sit, watch, you do. The clay squelches and spins slowly as he shapes it into a small jar. For the mouth, he says, answering your unspoken question. Everything ends up in the mouth. Wine, words, and wisdom. Best to store their keepers well. He smooths the rim with his thumb. You'd be surprised, he continues, how many tooth powders I've seen spill or spoil because someone used a cheap jar. He grins. A bad lid ruins good medicine. Historians rarely mention them, but craftsmen like this one were the invisible backbone of Egyptian hygiene. Without airtight jars and perfectly fired lids, every precious powder of natron or honey would have turned useless in days. He hands you a finished jar. It's small, smooth, faintly warm from the kiln. This one, he says, is for the priests. They like their jars round and dignified. He sets it aside and begins another, taller, with a narrower neck. This one's for the soldiers. They don't care about beauty, only that it won't break. You ask if the designs mean anything. He nods. The shape speaks. The wide mouth invites. The narrow one protects. The gods notice such things. He carves a small symbol, a lotus flower, on the base. Lotus for purity. Every jar must breathe the same virtue as what it holds. From a corner shelf, he pulls down a curious piece, a jar shaped like a human head with a removable top. Canopic jar, he explains, used for mummification. But see, this one's smaller. For herbs, not organs. I make them for healers who believe the body's power lies in likeness. A jar shaped like a face guards the face it serves. He chuckles. If I believed everything my clients say, I'd be immortal by now. You smile. Maybe you are, through your jars. He laughs softly. Maybe. The dead use my jars more carefully than the living, I think. He gestures for you to help. Here, try shaping one, slowly. The clay is cool and slick, and under your fingers, it begins to form something resembling a crooked cup. The craftsman grins. Not bad, but too wide. That one's for a glutton. He pats your shoulder. Still, it'll hold something. That's all a vessel must do. Outside, a pair of young apprentices carry in baskets filled with dried herbs and ground powders. The craftsman inspects each batch. Myrrh. Good. Matron. Clumpy needs drying. Iris root. Fragrant. This is the one that keeps the gums from bleeding, you know. He opens a jar, sniffs it, and nods in approval. Still strong after 3 moons. That's why my jars are prized. He taps the lid twice. Tight enough for eternity. Historians still debate the full scope of Egyptian craftsmanship in daily hygiene. Pottery was not just art, it was chemistry. The kilns had to reach perfect heat. The glaze precise. The clay filtered fine enough to keep air and moisture from creeping in. Every small innovation preserved more medicine, more trade, more life. As he works, the craftsman tells stories. Once, he says, a merchant came to me complaining that his jars cracked on the journey to Thebes. I told him, it's not the heat, it's the impatience. Clay hates haste. You rush the drying, you lose the soul. You nod. That sounds like a proverb. He winks. Everything is, if you repeat it enough. When he finishes a new batch, he lines them along a low shelf, humming a slow tune. The repetition feels almost like prayer. Hands, breath, pause, spin, seal. You realize that this rhythm, too, is part of Egypt's cleanliness culture. The care that went into storing medicine mirrored the care that went into using it. He notices your gaze. We don't make jars for things, he says quietly. We make them for trust. People put what they love inside, honey, salt, secrets. The jar keeps them honest. You ask if he ever keeps one for himself. He points to a small jar by his bed, marked only with the hieroglyph for silence. Empty, he says. But that's my favorite one. Why? He smiles. Because when I'm gone, someone will find it and wonder. They'll imagine it held something precious. That's enough. You sit with him in the soft light, listening to the faint crackle of cooling clay. Outside, the moon reflects on the Nile like spilled silver. When the apprentices finally close the shutters, the craftsman presses one of his smaller jars into your hands. For your travels, he says. Whatever you keep in it, keep it with care. That's the only magic there is. You run your thumb over the carved lotus, thinking of all the mixtures, debates, and rituals that started with such humble vessels. As you leave, he calls after you, remember, even the gods need good storage. And you walk on, smiling into the dark, the small clay jar warm against your palm, as if it's holding not just medicine, but memory. The streets grow quieter now, shadows pooling between doorways as lamps burn low. You wander toward the edge of the city, where the Nile widens and the air feels heavier, filled with the deep scent of water and reeds. The stars shimmer on the surface like 1,000 tiny oil lamps. There, near the bank, a low building stands half hidden behind a line of palm trees. A faint hum drifts from within, a song, soft and repetitive, like the rhythm of breath. You follow it and find a group of healers seated on reed mats, surrounded by baskets of herbs, bowls of resin, and rows of clay jars, much like the ones the craftsman had made earlier. The place feels alive, part clinic, part workshop, part classroom. "Come quietly," says a man with a shaved head and hands stained green from crushed leaves. "We're preparing a new formula." He gestures toward a table where 3 young apprentices are mixing something in a broad bronze bowl. The scent hits you first. Sharp, earthy, a blend of salt and iris, with undertones of honey and something like mint. "Tooth powder for the palace," the man explains. "The queen has delicate gums." You nod, watching as one apprentice measures each ingredient with careful precision. The other grinds pumice stone into fine dust while a third mixes it with oil, kneading the paste until it gleams faintly under lamplight. "Why pumice?" you ask. The healer smiles. "Because even stones can polish. The sea gives us its sand, and the mountain its teeth." He picks up a small reed brush and dips it into the mixture. "The mouth," he says, "is like the Nile. It carries life, but it must be dredged now and then." Historians still discuss the sophistication of these ancient dental formulas, but chemical analyses confirm that many did indeed contain abrasive and antiseptic properties, ingredients that modern toothpaste rediscovered millennia later. Pumice for cleaning, salt for sterilizing, and herbs for soothing, science hidden in ritual. One apprentice begins to hum as he works, a lilting tune that repeats every few beats. "Helps the hand remember," he explains. "If I stop humming, I'll lose count." The healer chuckles. In this house, music and medicine keep time together. You notice tablets stacked along one wall, each covered in dense writing. They're not papyrus scrolls, but rough drafts, clay pressed with reeds. The healer catches your glance. "Those are our records," he says. "Every new mixture, every failure, every smile restored. One day the gods may read them." He dips his brush again and tests a small dab of the paste on his own teeth. "A little harsh," he murmurs. More oil. The apprentices adjust, grind, and stir again. "Better," he says, tasting it once more. "Ah, gentle enough for royalty, strong enough for soldiers." As he speaks, a young woman enters carrying a basket of fresh herbs, mint, chamomile, and what looks like parsley. She bows slightly and begins plucking leaves into smaller piles. The air fills with their brightness. "The mint cools the mouth," she says softly, not looking up. "But the chamomile soothes the mind. The queen won't just have clean teeth. She'll have quiet dreams." You realize this is more than a workshop. It's an early laboratory of comfort, a place where healing was both physical and emotional. The Egyptians, in their pragmatic wisdom, never separated the two. The healer leans back, stretching his spine until it pops. "We learn by the mouth," he muses. "Taste tells truth faster than books." He scoops up a tiny sample and hands it to you on a twig. "Try." You brace yourself and dab it on your tongue. Gritty, yes, but the bitterness gives way to sweetness, and then a clean, cooling sensation. It's oddly pleasant, you admit. He grins. "That's how we know it's done." One apprentice takes careful notes. The proportions, the time, even the temperature of the room. Another pours the mixture into small jars, familiar shapes with narrow necks and carved lotus motifs. You remember the craftsman's words: "A jar must breathe the same virtue as what it holds." When the jars are sealed, the healer lifts one, holds it to the light, and murmurs a short prayer. "To the balance between decay and delight," he says. "May every tooth remember it." The apprentices repeat after him, their voices blending into the night hum. Outside, the frogs begin their chorus, and the air turns damp with river mist. You step to the doorway and breathe it in. The healer joins you, wiping his hands on a cloth. "The Nile teaches us everything," he says. "It cleanses, it feeds, it carries away. We only copy it with smaller mouths." You glance at him. "Do you think your mixtures will last forever?" He laughs. "Nothing lasts forever. But maybe, if someone opens one of my jars in 1,000 years and wonders what it was for, that's enough." Historians would later call men like him the practical magicians of Egypt. Their work left no monuments, no statues, only faint traces in tomb jars and written formulas that modern scientists still puzzle over. Yet here, under the flickering lamplight, Their humanity feels clear, experimenting, adjusting, joking, and caring in equal measure. Before you leave, the healer gives you a small clay tablet inscribed with a single line, "A clean mouth carries light." Remember that, he says. Every dawn starts there. You slip it into your pouch beside the craftsman's jar, feeling the faint indentations under your fingers. Objects born of clay and purpose, both meant to hold something invisible yet precious. The healer waves as you step outside. Behind him, the apprentices continue their song, stirring and sealing and laughing. The smell of mint lingers, and you think that if you could bottle this moment, the mix of smoke, laughter, and quiet work, it might be the truest cure of all. The Nile glimmers ahead, black and endless. Its ripples catch the starlight like lines of silver ink. Somewhere across that water, ships carry salt and myrrh to other cities, other mouths, other lives. The thought makes you smile. Even the stars reflected in the river look like tiny jars of light, each holding its own recipe for calm. Morning comes softly, rising from the river in a haze of pale gold. You wake to the sound of oars dipping into the Nile, long, even strokes that blend with the calls of herons gliding over the water. Across the opposite bank, sunlight begins to strike the pylons of distant temples, making them gleam like polished bone. You stretch and find yourself walking along the embankment toward the ferry crossing. A few travelers are waiting there, fishermen, merchants, and curiously, a group of men carrying large bundles wrapped in linen. One of them notices you and grins. "Dentists," he says proudly, thumping his chest. "Traveling to the workers' village. Bad teeth and good men," you raise an eyebrow. "There were dentists?" He laughs. "You think the gods would let us chew without help?" He unwraps one of the bundles, a set of bronze tools gleaming in the light. "Scrapers, picks, tweezers," he says. "And yes, we hurt people for their own good." The other men laugh as they load their gear onto the ferry. You follow them, curious. The wooden boat creaks as it pushes away from the dock, the oarsman humming a slow tune about the river's patience. The air smells of wet clay and sunlight on reeds. Historians have long debated the existence of formal dentists in ancient Egypt. But papyri and skeletal remains suggest it's true, trained healers specializing in oral care, some attached to temples, others serving the laborers who built the pyramids. They were craftsmen of comfort, even if their methods weren't always gentle. One of the men, older, missing a front tooth, notices your interest. "First rule of healing," he says, tapping his tool bag, "don't flinch." He holds up a slender bronze hook. "This one's for removing stones or bits of bone stuck between teeth. Works better than prayers." Another pulls out a thin, curved instrument. This one scrapes. The mouth collects more sand than the desert. He grins, revealing teeth worn flat from years of bread ground with grit. "We give the rich honey and herbs. The poor get a steady hand." As the ferry glides across the water, you listen to their conversation drift between jokes and philosophy. One complains about temple priests demanding donations before blessing a tooth extraction. Another recalls a soldier who fainted before the first pull. "He woke up praising the gods," he says. "Or maybe cursing me. Hard to tell." When you reach the opposite shore, the sun is climbing fast, drying the mist. You follow them up a narrow path toward the workers' village. Small houses of mud brick clustered around communal wells. The sound of hammers and chisels echoes from the nearby quarries. The dentists set up their station under a canopy, laying out tools on a reed mat. A small crowd gathers almost immediately. Men with swollen jaws, women covering their mouths, and a few children watching wide-eyed. The older healer claps his hands. "All right, my friends. Who among you angers the gods with bad teeth today?" The crowd chuckles nervously. One man steps forward, grimacing. The healer seats him on a low stool and examines his mouth with a small bronze mirror polished to a dull shine. "Aha, the culprit." He picks up a narrow instrument and gestures for the man to hold still. The other healers hold him by the shoulders. You flinch as the tool goes in. There's a muffled cry, a flash of movement, then laughter as the healer holds up a small piece of broken tooth like a trophy. "Behold, the spirit of pain departs." The man spits, then laughs too, though his eyes water. The healer presses a bit of honey-soaked cloth into the gap. "No bleeding, no curse," he says. "Drink beer. Not too cold." Historians still argue whether anesthetics were ever used, but some texts mention henbane and mandrake, plants with mild numbing properties. The healer here pulls a small bundle of dried leaves from his pouch and offers one to the next patient. Chew, he instructs. You'll feel less like dying. You can't help smiling at the practicality of it all. Pain management, Egyptian style. A young apprentice grinds salt and myrrh together in a bowl, mixing it with water into a rinse. He hands it to each patient afterward, saying solemnly, "For the blessing of a clean mouth." By midday, the line has thinned. The dentists eat flatbread and onions, rinsing with the same salt water they prescribed. Best way to sell, one jokes. Show the product works. You sit with them, watching the way they laugh at their own exhaustion. The elder healer leans back and sighs. "You know," he says, "we mend more pride than teeth. The pain always fades, but the laughter stays longer." Another nods. "That's why we work outdoors." Pain needs wind to carry it away. You ask if they ever get tired of the screaming. He chuckles. "It's music, friend. Each cry means one less ache in the world." A boy runs up, holding out a small clay pot. "My mother made this for you," he says shyly. Inside is a paste of honey and crushed herbs. The healer tastes it and smiles. "Perfect," he says. "Tell her she could teach half the priests in Thebes." As the sun begins to set, they pack their tools. Each one is carefully cleaned with water and wrapped in linen. "Clean hands, clean blades," the elder mutters. "That's our true protection." Before leaving, he pats your shoulder. "You watched well," he says. "Remember this. People fear pain more than decay, but decay is what wins if you don't act." Sometimes mercy looks like cruelty. He grins again, then whistles for the ferry. The others follow, carrying their linen bundles like small coffins of relief. You watch them go, silhouettes against the glowing horizon. The air is still heavy with the scent of salt, honey, and something darker. Resilience, maybe. It hits you then. The continuity of it all. From temple priests chanting prayers to traveling dentists scraping teeth beside the Nile, the act remains the same, to bring order where the body fails, to make people laugh through pain, to keep life clean and bearable. As twilight deepens, you sit alone on the riverbank, dipping your fingers into the cool water, ripples spread outward catching the last light. Somewhere, a patient is already bragging about his bravery. A mother is teaching her child to brush with mint, and a priest is whispering that cleanliness is next to divinity. And here you are, in the middle of it, between science and faith, laughter and ache, the eternal human search for comfort. The next morning, the world smells of dew and bread. A thin fog hugs the Nile, and the horizon glows like a bronze mirror. You follow the river north, where papyrus reeds grow thick and tall, rustling softly like whispering voices. Somewhere ahead, laughter carries over the water, young voices, relaxed and unguarded. As you draw closer, you find a group of children gathered near a shallow bend of the river. They're playing some kind of game using reeds as pretend toothbrushes. One girl, perhaps 10, stands on a rock, declaring herself the goddess of clean mouths. The others kneel before her, exaggeratedly brushing with muddy twigs. "Bow to me," she shouts, "or your breath will frighten crocodiles." They all burst into giggles, splashing water at each other. It's an innocent scene, yet there's wisdom in it. Hygiene had long since woven itself into Egyptian childhood, not from royal decrees or priestly sermons, but from songs and laughter like this. Even children understood that cleanliness was a game that made them powerful, and a little less afraid of the unseen things that could hurt them. A boy sees you watching and grins. "Want to play, stranger?" he calls. You can be the dentist of Ra. The title sounds impressive enough, so you accept. They hand you a stick, and the girl goddess solemnly declares, "Your duty is to protect our smiles from the worms of decay." So there you are, brushing air and pretending to banish invisible tooth demons while the children cheer. For a moment, you forget time entirely. Historians rarely write about children's roles in Egyptian health culture, but wall paintings show young apprentices assisting healers, and small reed toys have been found in tombs, carved with tiny figures brushing or washing. Even play was practiced for adulthood. One of the older children hums a tune, slow and rhythmic. The others join in, their voices rising in unison. Salt for strength, honey for peace. Laugh, my brothers, the worms will cease. Brush by moon, rinse by sun, the gods love clean mouths on everyone. It's both silly and strangely beautiful. The melody drifts across the river, blending with the cry of birds and the lap of water. When the song ends, a small girl asks you shyly, "Do the gods really care if our mouths are clean?" You kneel to her height and answer, "I think they care if you care. Clean mouths make kind words." She blinks, considers this, and nods gravely, as if you've just revealed a cosmic secret. Nearby, a mother calls out for the children to come eat. They run off laughing, leaving behind small imprints in the mud. You follow them toward a shaded courtyard where several families sit together for breakfast. Flatbread, onions, dates, and bowls of fresh milk. Before they eat, each person rinses their mouth with a small sip of water and natron. Even the toddlers mimic their parents, grimacing at the taste. "It's bitter," one complains. His father chuckles. So is truth. Both keep you clean. You join them, sitting cross-legged as they pass around bread still warm from the fire. The youngest girl proudly presents a twig of mint she's been chewing. "See? I'm helping my teeth grow strong like a hippo's." Her mother laughs. "Then you'd better stop biting your brother." Historians sometimes call ancient Egyptian society obsessive about purity. But sitting here, surrounded by the smell of smoke and mint, you see it differently. It wasn't obsession, it was continuity. Cleanliness connected everything: prayer, play, work, and rest. A grandmother begins telling a story to the children. Her voice is raspy but steady. "Long ago," she begins, "there was a crocodile god who lost all his teeth because he refused to clean them. He had to borrow new ones from a turtle who said, 'I'll lend you my teeth, but only if you smile more often.' The crocodile agreed, and that's why crocodiles always look like they're smiling." The children gasp and giggle. The grandmother winks at you. "Every story has a truth, traveler. Some just hide it under scales." You ask her where she learned that tale. "From my grandmother," she says simply. "And she from hers." The tooth powders change, the stories don't. As the meal ends, the adults resume their morning chores. Women fetch water, men mend nets, and children chase after chickens that wander too close to the bread. A small boy sits beside you, chewing thoughtfully on his twig. "Do people in your village brush their teeth?" he asks. You smile. "Some do, some forget." He frowns, puzzled. "Then their gods must have weak noses." The remark makes you laugh until your stomach hurts. When the sun climbs higher, you thank the family for their kindness and begin walking upriver again. The air grows warmer, carrying the scent of lotus and smoke. You pass more homes, each with its own rhythm of daily care. Women washing clothes, men polishing tools, children rinsing their mouths with giggles and complaints. One little girl waves a twig like a wand and shouts after you, "Don't forget to brush, traveler." "I won't," you call back. As you walk on, the laughter fades behind you, replaced by the rustle of reeds and the low hum of cicadas. The river glitters like glass, the same river that's seen millennia of lives rinse, laugh, and renew. It's strange, you think, how something as small as brushing teeth could become a thread through all this, connecting children and queens, priests and potters, healers and dreamers. In a way, it's the simplest proof of civilization, that people cared enough to keep decay at bay, even in the smallest corners of themselves. And as the wind ripples through the papyrus fields, you feel a kind of gratitude settle in your chest, quiet, steady, and clean.
By midday, the heat feels thick enough to hold in your hands. You walk along a narrow dirt road lined with date palms, their shadows cutting long stripes across the path. Somewhere ahead, the faint clatter of bronze echoes through the air, rhythmic, metallic, almost musical. Following the sound, you arrive at a courtyard filled with the smell of smoke and melting metal. This is a workshop for tool makers, and today, they're crafting something new. Bronze glows red in a small furnace, while two men pump the bellows in steady rhythm. Nearby, another man sits shaping a thin rod with deliberate care, using a chisel and stone. It looks familiar, but you can't quite place it until he holds it up to the light. A small, curved scraper, the unmistakable ancestor of a dental pick. He notices your stare and grins. Beautiful, isn't it? A tool small enough to fight decay, but strong enough to face a god. You ask what it's for, though you already know. "Teeth," he says. "The mouth is full of tiny caves. This helps us dig without breaking the mountain." He dips the metal into cool water, steam hissing. The sound makes you shiver despite the heat. "These are for the healers," he adds. "They say the bronze remembers pain, so it works better. Historians still argue about the exact instruments Egyptians used for dental care, but evidence shows a remarkable variety. Scrapers, tweezers, probes, and needles. Even miniature drills have been found in tombs, suggesting a level of precision centuries ahead of its time. The thought is both impressive and slightly terrifying. The craftsman hands one of the cooled picks to a younger apprentice. "Careful," he warns. "Too sharp and you harm the flesh. Too dull and you anger the gods." The boy nods solemnly and begins polishing. The bronze catches the sunlight like liquid fire. "People think we make tools," the craftsman says, "but we really make trust." A patient opens his mouth helpless and hopes you don't slip. That's faith. You ask if he ever wonders how many mouths his work has saved. He chuckles. "I hope more than it's ruined." But that's up to the hand that holds it. Behind him, another worker carves hieroglyphs onto a handle. You lean closer. It's a simple inscription. "Clean hands, clear heart." The craftsman glances over. "That's the mark of the Healers Guild," he explains. "If a tool bears it, it's been blessed and tested." He smirks. "And priced higher, of course." He shows you a basket of finished instruments wrapped in linen. Each piece gleams faintly like treasure. "We sell them to temples, to healers, even to soldiers," he says. "Toothaches don't care about rank." You notice a different set. Small rods with flattened ends. "Those are for powders," he says. "Used to scoop or mix. Sometimes to scrape the tongue. We call them the silent brushes." He picks one up and runs his thumb along the cool surface. "You'd be surprised," he adds, "how many stories begin with a single clean mouth. Lovers, merchants, liars. They all need their tongues in working order." The apprentice laughs. "So we make weapons for poets." The craftsman nods approvingly. "Exactly. And for priests and for beggars. The mouth builds empires." He leads you to the far corner, where molds cool in a basin of water. "Bronze needs patience," he says. "Rush it, and it cracks. Let it rest, and it remembers its purpose." He pulls one mold apart, revealing a row of perfect, slender instruments. The shine feels almost alive. Historians might call it metallurgy, but here it looks like ritual. The rhythm of hammer and breath, the way each tool emerges from fire and water. It's as though every scraper is baptized before touching a human tooth. As the men work, the courtyard fills with the clang of hammers and the low hum of work songs. One verse catches your attention. "Bronze of earth, drink the flame, cut the rot, but leave no shame. Clean the wound, calm the cry, let the god of mouth stand by." It's rough poetry, but it fits. The line between science and prayer blurs again, melted down and reforged into something practical, something enduring. The craftsman pauses to drink from a jug of cool beer, wiping his forehead with a linen cloth. "The priests bless our tools," he says, "but it's the healers who curse them when they break." He laughs, showing a gap in his own teeth. "Maybe I should make one for myself next time." He tosses you a small unfinished piece of bronze, still warm to the touch. "Keep it," he says. A reminder that every cure begins with something raw and imperfect. You roll it in your palm, feeling its weight, light but deliberate. "So," you say, "you make things that hurt to help." He nods slowly. "Exactly. The world is full of pain. Our job is to make sure it's the right kind." The apprentices finish their work, stacking the cooled instruments carefully into clay jars lined with linen. One draws the lid closed and seals it with wax. "Off to the healers," he says. "They'll make people cry and call it salvation." The craftsman chuckles, as long as they come back smiling. As you leave the courtyard, the air smells of metal and mint. Strange companions, but fitting. You glance back once more. Sparks fly from the forge, rising into the sunlight like tiny golden prayers. You realize that every generation has its own forge, whether of metal, words, or dreams. And maybe that's what keeps humanity brushing forward, one careful scrape at a time. The afternoon heat shimmers over the desert's edge, turning the horizon into liquid gold. You left the clang of bronze behind, following a dusty path that winds toward the workers' district near the great necropolis. Ahead, colossal stone walls rise from the sand like the bones of a sleeping god. The scent of limestone and sweat fills the air, the perfume of construction and devotion. Here, men carve eternity from rock. But in the middle of this monumental labor, someone has built a smaller miracle, a shaded tent with a painted sign showing a smiling face. Beneath it, a healer tends to the pyramid builders, his hands moving with gentle precision. He looks up as you approach. Another spectator? He asks with a grin. Or a patient pretending not to be? You smile and sit beside him. His workspace is simple. A clay bowl of salt water, a few worn bronze tools, and a pot of honey. They call me Menka, he says, dipping a cloth into the bowl. The healer of broken mouths. A young worker limps in, clutching his jaw. Third time this week. Menka mutters, "These men chew more stone than bread." He motions for the patient to sit, then examines his mouth under the flicker of sunlight. "Cracked molar," he says. "Too deep to save." He mixes honey with crushed iris root and applies it before reaching for his bronze pick. The air thickens with tension. The worker squeezes his knees together, eyes shut tight. There's a sharp twist, a muffled cry, and then silence. Menka wipes his hands calmly. "Spit," he instructs. The worker obeys, blood mixing with the sandy floor. Menka nods approvingly. A clean pull. He hands a man a small lump of natron to suck on. "Tastes like stone," he warns. "Because it is." Historians still debate whether tooth extraction was common practice or emergency measure, but archaeological finds of jawbones with neatly healed sockets suggest it was more frequent and more skilled than once believed. Egyptians knew that decay, left alone, could poison the body. To pull a tooth was to save a life. Menka rinses his tools in salt water, then dries them carefully on linen. "The priests say the gods remove pain," he says. "But I think the gods simply gave us courage to pull harder." He leans back, stretching his arms, and smiles at you. "Don't look so pale, traveler. A mouth without pain is a temple." Around him, other healers assist, grinding herbs, cleaning cloths, recording notes in chalk on a flat stone. One, a young woman with quick hands, prepares a soothing salve. "For the gums," she explains. "Honey, chamomile, and ground pearl. It cools the fire." You ask if they treat more than teeth. "Of course," she says. "The body is one river. The mouth is just where the flood begins." Menka nods at her words. "When we clean the mouth, we purify the whole person. You'd be surprised how many men find faith again after a toothache." He gestures toward a nearby shrine, a small stone altar with offerings of bread, flowers, and a carved amulet of Thoth, the god of knowledge. "We thank Thoth for steady hands," he says, "and Sekhmet for forgiving our mistakes." You can't help but admire their humility. They face pain daily and still make jokes about it. The young woman smirks. "Yesterday, a man offered me his goat if I could make his toothache vanish in one day. I told him to come back tomorrow." The tent fills with laughter, easing the tension like incense. Historians might call it early medicine, but what you witness feels closer to fellowship. These people mend not only bodies but pride, and somehow, amid dust and suffering, they manage grace. Later, Menka invites you to share their meal. You sit under the tent flap, watching the sun lower itself toward the dunes. Bread, onion, dates, and a jug of beer. Simple, satisfying. "Eat," he says, "but chew slowly. The gods are still watching." As they eat, the healers exchange stories about stubborn patients, superstitious priests, and the latest miracle cures from Palace. One swears that a noble physician uses powdered emerald for his toothpaste. Menka laughs. "Ah, yes, for when you want your smile to cost a fortune." When the meal ends, the young woman cleans the tools again. Menka watches her, nodding approvingly. "We clean more metal than mouths," he says. "That's how we keep the world from rotting." He gestures toward a pyramid towering in the distance, its edges glowing in the dying light. "They bill for eternity," he says softly. "We work for mornings. Each dawn someone wakes without pain, and that's enough immortality for me." You sit together in silence, listening to the rhythmic thud of chisels far off. Workers chant to keep pace, their voices drifting through the heat. "Raise the stone, lift the soul, brush the teeth, make it whole." The line draws laughter from the healers. They say that every morning now, the young woman says, their foreman thinks it improves morale. You imagine the sound carrying across centuries, echoing through time, half prayer, half joke. As twilight deepens, Menka cleans his hands once more, the water turning pink in the bowl. He looks at you and says, remember this, traveler, pain always visits, but neglect invites it to stay. He hands you a reed-wrapped bundle. For the road, he says. Inside, you find a small packet of mint leaves, a sliver of pumice, and a note scratched on the papyrus. Clean mouth, clear heart. You thank him, tucking the bundle safely away. Don't thank me, he says with a tired smile. Just keep brushing. The gods love consistency. As night falls, you walk back toward the river. Behind you, the healers extinguish their lamps, their laughter fading into the hum of insects. Ahead, the Nile shimmers under the first stars, a ribbon of silver connecting every village, every mouth, every story. You pause and look back once more. Menka's tent is a faint glow in the distance, a beacon of care among giants of stone. And you realize that perhaps, in a civilization obsessed with eternity, it's these small acts of daily mercy that truly endure. By the time dawn rises again, a thin veil of mist clings to the riverbanks. The city stirs, low voices, the clatter of amphorae, and the rhythmic bray of donkeys echoing from the docks. You find yourself back near the temple quarter, drawn by curiosity and the faint, familiar scent of resin and papyrus. A group of scribes sits outside the Temple of Thoth, their scrolls spread like the wings of ibis birds drying in the morning light. The oldest among them, a man with a stoop and ink-stained fingers, beckons you over. You've walked far, haven't you? He asks without looking up. His voice is steady, patient. Sit, then. The river carries travelers, but words carry time. You sit. Before him lies a new scroll, still half blank. Across the top, you read the title, The Book of Pleasant Breath. You can't help smiling. That sound poetic. He nods. Everything sacred begins as poetry. Dipping his pen, he adds carefully, and everything practical ends as scripture. He gestures for you to listen. We're compiling recipes, he says, not for gods or kings, but for those who speak to them. Priests, envoys, lovers, anyone who must open their mouths in public. He turns to his apprentice. Read the latest entry. The young man clears his throat and reads aloud. To make the mouth sweet like the breeze from the north, mix honey, cinnamon, and the dried petals of blue lotus. Warm with oil of myrrh until fragrant. Speak kindly after using. The old scribe looks up. See? Every cure must include a moral. You laugh softly. So you're writing a book of both medicine and manners. He smiles. Aren't they the same? What's a clean mouth worth if it speaks poison? Historians have long noted the Egyptian obsession with oral health. But here, in this courtyard, you see the deeper truth. Cleanliness was an ethic, not a habit. To maintain purity of the mouth was to guard the sanctity of speech. He continues writing, his stroke slow but sure. This next one, he says, is for travelers. The desert dries the mouth, cracks the tongue, steals words before they're spoken. He pauses to think. So, soak dates in water overnight, then mix with mint and natron. Rinse before dawn prayers. The apprentice nods, taking notes. Will that stop bad breath? He asks. It might, the scribe replies. But better still, it teaches patience. You watch as the ink flows in long lines, curling symbols like rivers bending through time. Each recipe is a bridge, between body and spirit, between science and superstition. A breeze picks up, carrying the sweet, earthy scent of crushed papyrus. The scribe glances at you. You've seen the healers, haven't you? You nod. And the craftsmen, the traders, the priests? Yes. He smiles faintly. Then you've seen how the Nile writes through us all. We copy what the river does. Cleanse, nourish, renew. He dips his pen again, his hand trembling slightly, but never losing rhythm. The gods gave us decay, he says, so we'd have reason to create. The apprentice interrupts, curious. Master, what do we call the act of cleaning the mouth? Is it medicine or worship? The old man chuckles. Both and neither. It is remembering. We remember that we are fragile, and yet we persist. He gestures to the apprentice to write that down. The boy looks uncertain. It doesn't sound like a recipe. Everything's a recipe if you mix it right, the scribe replies. You find yourself mesmerized by a steady cadence. The rustle of papyrus, the faint scratch of reed against fiber, the small sighs between lines. There's a peace in this work, a quiet devotion that feels almost like prayer. Historians still debate whether such texts, the so-called books of breath, truly existed or were later reconstructions. But the fragments found in tombs echo the same philosophy. To purify the mouth is to align with Ma'at, the principle of cosmic order. Clean teeth, honest tongue, clear conscience. 3 versions of the same harmony. A young priest arrives, carrying a small basket. The temple requests more of the mint mixture, he says. The scribe nods. Tell them to use less honey this time. Too sweet, and they'll talk too much. The apprentice snorts. Try not to laugh. The scribe raises an eyebrow, but smiles. Yes. Boy, balance, always balance. He closes a scroll carefully, tying it with a strip of linen. One day, he says, someone will read these lines and think we were primitive. Let them, as long as they still brush their teeth. We've done our job. He places a finished scroll among a small pile labeled with titles. The Art of Clean Flesh, The Hymn of Breath, Manual of Healing for the Common House. Each one represents centuries of patience compressed into fragile pages. You ask him what he'll write next. He gazes toward the river, eyes distant. Perhaps a guide for the soul after death, he murmurs. But not for crossing the underworld. For entering it with a smile. You can't tell if he's joking. Probably both. He hands you a small slip of papyrus, a practice line from his apprentice. Covered in fresh ink that smells faintly of lotus. The words read, "Let your speech be sweet, your mouth be true." Keep it, he says. Ink fades, but habit remains. As you stand to leave, the temple bells begin to sound, low and resonant, echoing across the river. The scribes pack up their scrolls, bow their heads, and begin their slow procession toward the inner sanctum. You walk away through the golden dust, the slip of papyrus fluttering in your hand like a tiny flag of memory. Behind you, the voices of the scribes drift through the morning air, calm, rhythmic, and steady as breath. And for the first time, you realize that maybe civilization isn't built only on stone or gold, but on words spoken cleanly, carried gently and remembered with care. By late afternoon, the air turns heavy again, but the city glows soft beneath its golden haze. You follow a narrow alley that winds between walls painted with faded hieroglyphs, scenes of daily life. Fishermen, bakers, and curiously, a woman holding a twig to her lips. She isn't praying, she's brushing her teeth. Beneath her, the inscription reads, "Purity brings favor." You can't help but smile. Even in paint, the Egyptians managed to immortalize their routines. At the end of the alley, you step into an open courtyard shaded by palm fronds. The sound of laughter drifts from within, deep, rolling laughter that belongs to people who know both exhaustion and joy. Inside, a small group of musicians lounges around a low table covered in bowls of fruit and jars of wine. A lyre leans against one wall, and the air carries a rich scent of dates, smoke, and roasted sesame. "Join us," says a voice. You turn to see a man with silver bracelets and an easy smile. His linen tunic is finely woven, though his bare feet are dusty. "We've been rehearsing for the banquet at the governor's house tonight, but the singers complain of sore throats." You sit curious. "You're musicians?" He grins. "We are servants of joy, which is harder work." One of the singers coughs lightly. The leader rolls his eyes. "This is what happens when you eat honey cakes and forget your mouthwash." He gestures to the servant. "Bring the rinse, the one with mint and lotus." Moments later, a small bronze bowl is placed before them, steaming slightly from warm water. The scent is sharp, cooling, sweet. Each performer takes a sip, gargles, spits neatly into a separate vessel. For the throat, for the breath, for the song, they murmur in unison, a small melodic ritual. Historians still debate whether professional singers and orators use specialized rinses, but texts from Deir el-Medina mention breath waters made from herbs and resins. The performers of Egypt treated their mouths as instruments, not organs. Tune before use. The leader offers you the bowl. Try, he insists. Even a traveler must speak clearly. You take a cautious sip. The warmth slides over your tongue, minty and floral, leaving your mouth tingling and clean. Better than beer, you admit. He laughs. It would be if it made you sing. He gestures toward the youngest musician, who plucks a slow melody on his lyre. Listen, the leader says softly. Each note, like each breath, must leave the body pure. Otherwise, it clogs the air. The music is haunting, low, repetitive, winding like the Nile at dusk. A woman joins in, her voice slow and smoky. It's not performance yet, it's practice, intimate and unhurried. She pauses mid-phrase, clears her throat, and rinses again. Too much dust today, she murmurs. Her companion teases. Or too much gossip. She laughs. Words rot faster than teeth, my friend. The others nod, smiling knowingly. You can see that for them, this act of cleansing before song isn't vanity. It's part of the art itself. The mouth, after all, is the source of everything. Voice, prayer, laughter, persuasion. The leader sits beside you, pouring himself a cup of wine. You've watched healers and priests, he says, but you've missed our kind, the keepers of breath. He explains it before every great performance. Singers cleanse their mouths and lips with honey, mint, and oil to sweeten the voice and the temper. A bitter singer ruins a feast, he adds dryly. You ask if the governor insists on such rituals. He doesn't need to, the man replies. We insist ourselves. Our must be clean or it carries lies. That line lingers in the air, simple, profound, and true beyond its time. He leans back against a pillar, watching the others tune their instruments. Historians, he says, chuckling, will think we lived only to build tombs and pray to cats. But we lived to laugh, to sing, to tease, to make the gods jealous of how alive we felt. He calls for the rinse again, this time mixing it with wine. For courage, he says, offering you the bowl. You take a sip, sharp and sweet, almost medicinal. Ah, he says, smiling, you're one of us now. As the sun begins to sink, they start a full rehearsal. The music rises, rich and hypnotic, echoing off the courtyard walls. Lyrics drip between history and humor. Praises a Hather, complaints about tax collectors, jokes about toothworms that dance when you drink too much wine. You laugh until your ribs ache. And then, as if on cue, the leader slows the tempo. The final verse comes out softer, gentler. When the breath is clean, the heart is free, and even the gods hum quietly. Silence follows. No applause, just the sound of evening wind stirring the palms. He looks at you, his smile fading into something thoughtful. You see, traveler, he says, cleaning the mouth isn't just about smell or sickness. It's about readiness. The body prepares for truth, whether it's prayer, song, or love. He stands, stretches, and claps his hands. Now we go sing for men who pretend to be gods. The musicians laugh, packing their instruments. Before they leave, the leader offers you a small clay flask. For the road, he says. Lotus and mint keeps your breath honest. You bow in thanks. And what should I give in return? He winks. Just remember, the world listens better to clean words. As night deepens, you walk toward the river once more, flask in hand. The air hums with leftover notes from their song. You take a small sip of the rinse, cool, fragrant, and feel it ripple through you like the last chord of melody fading into silence. Somewhere across the water, another song begins, low, distant, like memory itself exhaling. And for the first time, you realize that maybe Egypt's greatest invention wasn't stone or script, but this quiet mastery of care, this belief that every word, every breath deserved to begin clean. The banquet hall glows like an ember when you arrive. Lanterns hang from carved wooden beams, casting honey-colored light on polished limestone floors. Servants move like quiet ghosts between long tables set with roasted duck, figs, and bowls of lentils. The air hums with a low murmur of nobles and officials. Men and women who are perfumed thick enough to challenge the incense drifting from bronze braziers. You slip in behind a line of musicians. The same troupe you met earlier takes their place at one corner, tuning lyres and tightening drum skins. A priest of Hathor offers each singer a final rinse of lotus mint water from a small alabaster jar. They gargle, bow toward the altar at the far end of the room, and smile in perfect unison. At the head of the hall sits the governor, his robe white as moonlight, a heavy necklace gleaming on his chest. He claps once and the feast begins. The noise swells, laughter, clinking cups, the squeak of sandals against stone. And over it all rises music, slow and sweet, rolling like the Nile itself. You find yourself seated near the servants, watching. Trays of food pass endlessly. Dates stuffed with almonds, bowls of honey, and pitchers of red wine spiced with cinnamon. Everyone eats with fingers, pausing often to dab their mouths with linen cloths scented with myrrh. Each bite is followed by ritual rinsing. Small cups of water mixed with natron or mint. Historians have found written evidence of these banquets, where etiquette demanded not only elegance of dress, but of breath. Guests carried tiny breath cones of scented wax on their heads that melted slowly through the night, perfuming their hair and perhaps disguising the garlic on their tongues. Cleanliness had become theater, part of performance of civilization. A servant leans toward you. The governor insists no one speak to him without fresh breath. He whispers. He says foul mouths bring foul luck. You glance at the governor, who laughs thunderously at some joke, his teeth bright and even. Perhaps he's not wrong. One of the musicians begins a playful song about gossiping officials. The room erupts in laughter, but then grows quiet as a young poet stands. She holds a small reed scroll and clears her throat. A verse, she announces, for the sweetness of words. Her voice is clear, her diction crisp, each syllable cutting through the air like silk. The honey in the hive is mortal, but the honey on the tongue endures. We feed the gods with our speech, and they feed us with our silence. The hall stills. Even the governor leans forward, smiling softly. She's brushed her heart as well as her teeth, he murmurs, to general applause. You notice how even amid feasting, conversation turns again and again to cleanliness, not vanity, but discipline. To speak in public was sacred work. To laugh was an offering. Every gesture here, every carefully washed hand and polished tooth, proclaims respect for the listener. The servants move among the guests with bowls of rose water. For the lips, one says, dipping his fingers to sprinkle each person lightly. The scent mingles with wine and spice until the room feels like a living blossom. Historians still argue whether these practices came from religion, etiquette, or simple practicality in a hot climate. But watching it unfold, it's obvious all three were one and the same. Cleanliness wasn't just for the body, it was a social contract. The governor rises, lifting his cup. To health, to laughter, to breath that offends no god, he shouts. The crowd echoes the toast, and dozens of polished smiles flash in the lamplight. You almost laugh at the irony. So much palm for what began as salt, honey, and twigs beside a river. Later, when the feast winds down, the musicians pack their instruments, still laughing softly. The poet lingers by the door. She notices you watching and approaches, holding a small clay flask. For travelers, she says, lotus and cinnamon. Keeps your words kind. You thank her, and she tilts her head. Do you think it's foolish, she asks, that we fear bad breath more than bad hearts? You pause, searching for an answer. Maybe we clean what we can reach first. She smiles at that, a tired, knowing smile, and slips away into the night. You leave the hall soon after, stepping into the cool air outside. The moon reflects off the Nile, and the city seems quieter, gentler. You take a sip from the flask she gave you. The rinse is warm, fragrant, a strange comfort after so much noise. Somewhere behind you, the laughter from the hall fades, replaced by the croak of frogs and the distant rhythm of drums. You realize that even here, among the elite, the rituals of hygiene carry the same simple desire you've seen everywhere, from the healer's tent to children by the river, the wish to feel renewed, to meet the world without shame. You stand for a long time by the water, the air rich with the scent of lotus and smoke. The city hums faintly in the distance, a living creature, breathing, cleansing, dreaming. And as the first light of dawn edges the horizon, you think, perhaps history isn't a list of wars or kings, but mornings like this, when someone somewhere took the time to rinse, smile, and begin again. By the time dawn stretches over the desert again, the city has already begun its quiet rituals. Fishermen push their boats into the river. Women sweep thresholds with palm brooms. And from somewhere deep within the maze of narrow streets comes the soft, rhythmic sound of grinding. Pestles and mortars, mixing powders, oils, and paste for the day's needs. You follow that sound until you reach a low building marked with a faint symbol, a jar flanked by 2 reeds. Inside, it smells of burnt herbs, cedarwood, and resin. A young man greets you. His hands are streaked with gray dust, his linen apron damp with oil stains. "You're early," he says with a grin. "We've just begun today's batch." You soon realize this is a workshop, not of gold or perfume, but of medicine. Shelves line the walls, cluttered with jars labeled in careful hieroglyphs. Natron, frankincense, myrrh, honey, mint, charcoal. You recognize the ingredients instantly. Toothpaste ingredients, or their ancestors. The man gestures for you to follow. "I learned from my mother," he says proudly. "She was a healer, but the governor's men like our powders now. They say they make the breath of officials sweeter than wine." He laughs, then adds in a mock whisper, which isn't hard. At a stone table, 3 women work side by side, grinding dried mint and rock salt into fine dust. Their rhythmic motions fill the air with a faint metallic scent. Another worker slowly pours honey into a bowl, stirring until the mixture thickens. Each household has its own recipe, the man explains. Some use charcoal, others burn eggshells. But we found the right measure, sweet enough to please, rough enough to clean. He dips a finger into the paste and smears a small line across his palm. "See? Smooth, not grainy. That's what sets us apart." You ask how they learned this balance. "Trial," he says, "and a lot of error." He grins, showing teeth slightly too white to be accidental. Historians still debate the origins of Egyptian toothpaste. Some texts describe a mixture of salt, pepper, mint, and dried iris flower, an early blend that would sting like fire but leave the mouth startlingly clean. Others mention crushed pumice or ground ox hooves for polishing enamel. The recipes vary, but the intention never changes: to restore what the world wears down. The man points to a small pile of herbs drying near the window. "Those came up the Nile from Nubia. The traders say they ward off evil spirits, or at least bad odors. Same thing, maybe." He hands you a small stick of olive wood. The tip is frayed, soft, and darkened by use. "For cleaning between meals," he explains. The priests call it a chew stick. You chew the end, then brush. It keeps the teeth awake. You run your thumb along the rough fibers. It feels primitive but efficient. "We send hundreds of these to the palace every month," he adds proudly. "They say the queen uses one after every prayer." You imagine her, serene, immaculate, standing before a mirror of polished bronze, brushing delicately with a stick like this. It's strangely intimate, this glimpse of daily life across millennia. The man wipes his hands and beckons you toward a small side room. There, under a shaft of sunlight, stands an elderly woman with a steady gaze and arms streaked with ink. She's writing on a strip of papyrus with a reed pen. She's our record keeper. The man whispers, writes every change, every measurement. Says history begins with the first written recipe. Without looking up, she replies, and ends when someone forgets it. Her tone is dry but not unkind. She gestures for you to approach. "So, traveler, you've come to watch us mix the future?" You smile, or maybe the past. "Same difference," she says, dipping her pen. "Both stain your hands." She explains that her family's craft began generations ago, when healers and embalmers traded recipes. "We learned from the dead," she says matter-of-factly. "Their mouths had to stay pure for the journey beyond. If our mixtures could preserve them, they could protect the living too." That eerie but logical connection makes perfect sense here. The line between medicine and afterlife has always been blurred in Egypt. Cleanliness was never just about health. It was about the soul's presentation. She opens a clay jar and lets you smell the contents. It's sharp, earthy, almost peppery. Ground iris. she says, burns a little, reminds people that purity takes effort. You ask if they sell much. She chuckles. Enough. The soldiers like it. Says it keeps their teeth strong. The priests, too. Their worst customers, always asking for divine discounts. Her apprentice laughs from across the room. The old woman looks up with mock severity. Don't laugh, boy. Someday you'll charge the god's interest. You spend the rest of the morning watching them work. Every movement feels deliberate, measured, balanced, harmonious. There's no rush here, no shouting, no chaos. Only the gentle scrape of stone, the softness of grinding, the patient rhythm of creation. The man hands you a small pouch wrapped in linen. For travel, he says. Take a pinch, mix with water, rub on the teeth. You'll see. You thank him. And what should I pay? He waves it off. Just tell someone you met the people who gave breath back to the dead. You smile at that. I think they'll remember. As you step outside, sunlight floods your eyes. The air tastes faintly of mint and clay. Behind you, the rhythmic grinding continues, a steady heartbeat of civilization repeating itself through time. You realize as you walk away that you've just witnessed something quietly revolutionary. Not in grandeur, but in intention. These people weren't inventing luxury. They were inventing care. And somehow, thousands of years later, their gentle insistence on cleanliness would outlast empires. You tuck the linen pouch into your satchel and keep walking, wondering how many other small, ordinary miracles history has buried under the noise of kings. By midday, the city hums like a hive. You wander toward the markets, where merchants shout over one another in a chorus of prices and promises. Everywhere you look, color explodes. Baskets of blue lapis beads, piles of red ochre, bundles of green herbs. The air smells like everything at once. Sweat, smoke, resin, and the sweetness of ripe figs. You pause beside a stall where an old man sells tiny clay jars lined neatly in rows. Their lids are sealed with wax, and each bears a different symbol. An eye, a lotus, a bird. The vendor catches your gaze and waves you closer. For the breath, he says, tapping one jar. For the teeth, he taps another. For the words that matter most. He grins, his teeth stained but strong. People buy perfume to their bodies, but the wise perfume their mouths. You pick up one jar, break the seal, and inhale. The scent is faintly floral, with sharp mineral edge. What's inside? Powder from elephantine, he says proudly. Charcoal and iris, mixed with salt from the southern mines. Keeps the mouth clean and the tongue brave. You chuckle. Brave? He nods. A clean tongue fears no truth. Behind him, his granddaughter grinds fresh powder in a mortar. She hums as she works, rhythmic, patient, occasionally pausing to dip her fingers in oil. The scene feels eternal, this family passing down not just craft, but confidence. Historians still debate whether markets like this sold dental powders regularly or only for the wealthy. But here, it's clear the practice has spread beyond palaces and temples. Clean breath has become common courtesy, a mark of self-respect. The old man hands you another jar. This one's for lovers, he says with a wink. Crushed dates, lotus oil, and clove. Used before speaking sweet things. It makes promises last longer. You raise an eyebrow. Does it work? He laughs, a deep, dry sound. If it doesn't, at least you'll smell honest. A group of women stops by, dressed in fine linen, gold bangles chiming at their wrists. They test the powders, rub them between their fingers, lean close to smell. One whispers something to her friend, who giggles behind her hand. The vendor smiles knowingly. They always buy 2 jars, he says softly. One for themselves, one for whoever they hope will notice. As the women leave, you wander deeper into the market. A boy passes carrying a tray of reed sticks bundled in twine. Chew sticks for sale, still damp from a river. A priest haggles loudly over a shipment of natron. Nearby, a perfumer chants the ingredients of his mixtures like a prayer. You begin to see how seamlessly cleanliness and commerce intertwine. The act of brushing one's teeth isn't just hygiene, it's identity. It's how a person declares, I am civilized. I am worthy of being near. A few stalls down, a scribe sits beneath an awning, writing receipts for merchants. You notice a small bowl of powder next to his ink pot. He dips a wet reed into it every few minutes, rubbing it gently against his teeth before speaking. The dust dries the mouth, he explains when he catches your stare. But customers trust clean words. There's wisdom in that. Historians sometimes describe ancient Egypt as obsessed with purity, ritual washing, linen clothing, strict diets. But walking through this marketplace, it feels less like obsession and more like rhythm. Cleanliness here isn't performance. It's the pulse of belonging. You pause beside a food stall selling roasted fish wrapped in lotus leaves. The vendor, a stout woman with a laugh like thunder, calls out, "Eat before the sun eats you." You buy one, and she hands you a small cup of warm water mixed with salt and mint. For your mouth after, she says, fish is a friend until it lingers. You thank her, laughing. Even in street food, the ritual continues. After eating, you sit beneath the shade of a tamarisk tree, watching the city move. Every detail feels alive. The children playing near the well, mimicking their parents by rinsing their mouths. The soldiers inspecting their spears and then their smiles. The scribes dipping their reeds into water before speaking to superiors. The entire place breathes with intention. A traveler beside you, perhaps from Crete, judging by his accent, leans over. You Egyptians, he says good-naturedly, you clean everything. Even your laughter sounds washed. You grin. And you Greeks, you clean nothing but your sandals. He laughs, conceding. Fair enough. But tell me, why all this care for teeth? You think for a moment, because the gods listen too closely. He nods, thoughtful. Maybe I'll take that home. Later, when the sun begins to dip, the market slows. Merchants pack their goods. Children chase the last patches of light, and the smell of the river mingles with the smoke of cooking fires. The old vendor from earlier waves to you. Traveler, he calls. Did you find what you needed? You lift the small jar of powder he sold you. More than I expected. Good, he says satisfied. Then remember, the first mouth you must please each morning is your own. He winks, then disappears into the crowd. You stand for a while, watching the last rays of sunlight catch on the bronze bowls and painted jars. The city glows warm and timeless. In its endless noise, you hear something deeper, a gentle whisper carried through generations. Care for the small things. They keep the great ones alive. The breeze off the Nile carries that message to you, cool and mineral-scented. You close your eyes, breathing it in, and for a brief, shimmering moment, the entire world feels freshly brushed. Night drapes over the city like dark linen. The lamps along the river flicker one by one, their reflections quivering on the surface of the Nile like small promises kept. The world is quieted. Fishermen have tied their boats. Market stalls have been shuttered, and the air smells faintly of smoke, mint, and sleep. You walk slowly along the embankment. The linen pouch of toothpaste powder is still tucked in your hand. It feels heavier now, not because of its weight, but because of what it carries. Thousands of mornings, countless careful hands. The patient persistence of people who believe that even the smallest act, brushing one's teeth, could honor the divine. A priest passes you barefoot, carrying a torch. His mouth moves in silent prayer. He notices you and nods politely before continuing toward the temple. The orange glow fades behind him, leaving you alone with the sound of water slapping softly against the stones. You pause and dip your hand into the river, letting the coolness spread across your skin. It's impossible not to think of how many others have done the same. Healers, scribes, mothers, kings. This water has been both mirror and medicine, witness and purifier. It's the same water that once mixed with honey and ash to form the world's first toothpaste, centuries before anyone would name it that. You can almost hear them, the voices of those who live their entire lives by this river, whispering recipes to their apprentices. A little more natron, not too much salt. The gods prefer sweetness. You imagine their laughter when something went wrong, the small pride when someone's teeth shone brighter, the relief when a child's pain eased. Historians still debate how advanced these ancient mixtures really were. Some say the abrasives wore enamel down. Others argue the combination of salt and mint was as effective as modern formulas. But standing here, in the hush of an Egyptian night, you realize the truth doesn't need to be measured in chemistry. It lives in continuity, in the fact that the idea itself survived. The need to cleanse, to begin each day new, to prepare the mouth not just for eating, but for speaking kindly. You take out the linen pouch, untie it, and pinch a bit of powder between your fingers. You mix it with water from a Nile, swirl it into a pale paste, and rub it gently over your teeth using the frayed end of a small stick. The taste is sharp, salty, herbal, alive. For a moment, you are not a visitor, but a participant, part of the same unbroken ritual. Somewhere behind you, a chorus of frogs begins, rhythmic and steady. Their croaks blend with the distant hum of the city, the faint splash of oars, the sigh of wind through papyrus reeds. It feels almost deliberate, a slow, natural song to accompany your last act of the day. You rinse your mouth, and the water tastes clean. The mint lingers faintly, cool against the back of your throat. You breathe in deeply, and the air feels somehow wider, as if the entire world has exhaled with you. In that moment, you realize this story was never really about toothpaste. It's about care, the quiet kind that doesn't ask for recognition, the type that repeats itself every morning, whether anyone's watching or not. It's the belief that civilization isn't built on monuments, but on habits. That a person who takes a moment to cleanse their mouth might also take a moment to speak with gentleness. The stars above shimmer like grains of salt scattered across velvet. You imagine the gods looking down, amused perhaps, at how humans have turned their desire for cleanliness into something sacred, something creative, something eternal. You start walking again slowly, letting your feet follow the curve of the river. The wind brushes against your face, carried with it the faint sense of myrrh and honey from distant temples. You think of all the hands that have ground, mixed, stirred, and brushed, each one leaving behind a trace of the same hope, to meet the world unspoiled. You glance back at the water one last time. It gleams faintly under the moonlight, endless and forgiving. Somewhere downstream, the same river will carry this tiny moment, your mint-scented breath, your rinse reflection, into the future. And perhaps, far away, someone else will breathe in and feel the same quiet peace. You whisper a small thank you to the ancient hands that taught you how to begin, then turn toward the sleeping city. The sand beneath your sandals is cool, the stars unblinking. The night stretches ahead, infinite and calm. Now the story exhales too. Its edges soften, its pace slows. The last details fade. The distant laughter of the musicians, the faint scraping of a scribe's pen, the whisper of wind through reeds. The world narrows gently to breath and warmth and stillness. And as you drift into that space between waking and sleep, the scent of lotus and honey lingers faintly in the air, a reminder that even the simplest human acts, brushing, rinsing, caring, can echo through time like prayer. You breathe in, slow and deep. The Nile breathes with you, and history at last rests quietly beside you. You've reached the end of the journey, or perhaps just the quiet pause between breaths. The sounds of ancient Egypt fade into something softer now. The whisper of wind over water, the rustle of linen, the steady rhythm of your heartbeat. Everything that was vivid and noisy, the markets, the laughter, the songs, now drifts gently to the edges of your mind, like footprints disappearing beneath morning tide. The old river keeps flowing. It doesn't hurry. It never has. It carries dust and dreams, and a little mint from your last rinse. The city sleeps, and the air feels clean, untouched for a moment, renewed. You imagine the faint sweetness of honey lingering at the back of your throat, the smooth coolness of stone beneath your fingertips. There's nothing left to do, no thought to chase. Just this, the gentle rhythm of breathing, the weight of the blankets, the warmth of being alive. Let yourself loosen. Let your shoulders sink. Every part of you can rest now. The voice that listened, the mind that wandered, the heart that remembered. Even the echoes of the past grow tender when night leans close. Somewhere far away, a scribe's lamp flickers, a reed pen stills, and the Nile sighs softly. The story folds itself shut like a papyrus scroll, ready to be found again when you wake. Sleep well, traveler. You walk through millennia, and the world, like your breath, is clean again.